The man asked the couple if they vowed to love each other and stay together through sorrow and joy. The main character, Lizelle, noted that the wedding felt disturbingly real. Her husband turned to her expectantly. When she didn't respond right away, the man officiating asked Lizelle why she was silent. Embarrassed, she hesitated, while the boy beside her watched her with a happy, eager expression. In the end, she swore the vow. Afterward, the officiant said they could exchange rings to symbolize their union in the name of the goddess Armacon. With that, he declared them husband and wife. And just like that, Lizelle had gone through with it. She felt like a greedy woman, because she had married him purely for money. At last, the ceremony ended. Her maid, noticing how exhausted she looked, offered her a cup of tea. Lizelle practically begged her to bring it quickly, so the maid hurried off, asking for just a minute. Weddings, after all, were exhausting. Lizelle had only invited close relatives, so she wouldn't say the celebration dragged on, but she was still tired to death. She couldn't help thinking, I didn't expect it to turn out this way at all. The grand banquet hall, the luxurious dress, the jewelry. Everything was lavish, perfect, and fake. As fake as the marriage itself. Yet to the world, he was still Duke Chester Hyos, the most powerful and wealthy man in the empire. It saddened her that she'd even had to involve her parents. She wasn't sure this year would go smoothly. Someone knocked. "Come in," Lizelle said automatically. She told the maid to leave the tea on the table. She'd drink it later. But then, a man's voice answered from the other side of the door, startling her. Lester stood there, wearing only a robe. Lizelle blinked, confused and alarmed. Why was he here? And more importantly, why was he almost completely naked? She told him bluntly to get dressed. But Chester simply said that, as her husband, he had the right to spend the night with her. Lizelle was horrified. Then she laughed nervously, assuming it must be a joke, a strange, awkward joke about spending the night with her. But Chester didn't seem to understand what was funny. This was their wedding night, after all. Lizelle was stunned. Was he serious? When Chester began approaching her, she backed away and asked him to stop. "What kind of wedding night is this?" she demanded. "We didn't agree to anything like this." Bezin. He replied simply, "We're married, of course we will." Then, as if trying to be considerate, he asked if she needed time to think it over. Lizelle didn't want him coming near her with that intense expression. None of this made any sense. But Chester reached out to kiss her. Then he whispered something outrageous. "Don't even dream of sleeping tonight." Lizelle was speechless. There had been nothing in the contract about this. It had all started 3 months ago. Her father had asked for more time to pay the Duke what he owed. Chester had already waited those 3 months and said he wouldn't wait any longer. Lizelle's father had sworn there would be money next time. As well as I understood, otherwise Touchbacks were free to do as he wished. After that, the man paused to think, then said that if there was no money, the debt would have to be repaid. With the Baron's daughter. Lizelle had no idea what was happening. Her father hadn't believed his daughter could truly be at stake, but the man made it clear. If the Baron didn't want his daughter involved, he needed to repay the debt. Otherwise, he would do whatever he pleased. Reluctantly, the man gave the Baron 2 more months. The Baron tried to stop him, but the man had already turned away, leaving with his servants. Shaken, the Baron turned to Lizelle and said he was deeply ashamed of himself. He begged her forgiveness. But Lizelle simply turned to him and said there was no need to worry. Nothing terrible would happen. There was still time. Her father rushed to her and, trying to believe her words, told her she was right. He asked her to trust him and promised that he would never hand her over to anyone. Lizelle smiled weakly and said she believed him. She would go to her room. He agreed, saying she was probably a bit shaken and needed to rest. Later, the Baron asked his wife if she'd noticed how calmly their daughter had behaved. The Baroness nodded and said their daughter had grown up. Lizelle, however, didn't understand just how bad things really were. Her parents' reactions made that clear. They'd probably have to sell the house. And truthfully, she hated Lizelle. Because the main character isn't really Lizelle. She was just a girl who had fallen asleep reading a novel, and when she woke up, she had somehow become Lizelle, a spoiled noble girl in a book called Frozen. She hadn't even cared about this character. Lizelle had been a background figure to her. But now she was trapped in her body. And the real problem was how selfish and indulgent Lizelle had been. Her demands had pushed her family deep into debt. In the end, almost all their property had been taken. The worst part? The original Lizelle had lived in luxury, enjoyed every bit of her wealth, and now the main character was left to deal with the consequences. She was frustrated. Why did she have to clean up this mess? Still, there was no point in whining now. She needed money, and fast. She looked around. The room was filled with expensive junk, dresses, jewelry, accessories. It was probably worth something. She decided to sell as much as she could. She started gathering everything that might fetch a price, though she had no idea what it would all be worth. She'd have to ask the butler to sell it. When she told him, the butler was stunned. He asked how much she hoped to get. She replied that she didn't know. The things were second-hand, after all, but she had to try. Moved, the butler teared up. He couldn't believe the lady was doing all this to help her father. After 20 years of service, he said it was the first time he'd felt so proud of her. She was touched, but not enough to hug him. Instead, she told him she was going for a walk. She didn't think she'd be able to raise the full 80 million, and time was short. 2 months was too little. Things were looking bleak. If only money would fall from the sky, Lizelle muttered. Just as she was thinking about how to get the money, a piece of paper smacked her in the face. Annoyed, she looked up and grumbled, "If you're going to throw something, Lord, at least make it cash, not paper." Still, curiosity got the better of her, and she unfolded the paper. It was a wanted poster. For a missing 5-year-old boy. The reward? A staggering 100 million. Immediately, Lizelle remembered. L'Appel was the main character of the novel she had read. This must be the time in the story when he disappeared. She practically lit up with joy. Thank the heavens there's no law in this world against improving the life of a time traveller, she whispered to herself. After all, she knew exactly where he was. Her memory was sharp. This was her golden opportunity. She set out at once, eyes gleaming at the thought of that reward. Maybe he's in this pile, she muttered, rummaging through a large bag of trash. But it was just that. Garbage, food waste, rotten and smelly beyond belief. The smell is divine, she muttered dryly, holding her breath. I really need to get out of this dump. But Lizelle was a measured flower, as she liked to call herself, and a measured flower does not curse, no matter how foul the stench. She pressed on. 100 million shillings is no joke, she said. I will find him. Even if I have to swim through 100 rivers of garbage, I will not go back to being the beggar I once was. Her clothes were already torn from the mountains of filth she had waded through, but she kept searching. Then, suddenly, she heard a rustling behind her. She froze, straining to listen. Had she imagined it? Carefully, she crept toward the sound. And there he was, a small boy emerging from a pile of garbage. He had black hair and striking red eyes, just like the description on the poster. He looked up at her and, in a hoarse voice, called her Mum. Lizelle's heart stopped. She'd found him. She had actually found the boy worth 100 million shillings. She touched his forehead. Burning hot. Without a moment's hesitation, she scooped him up and ran straight to her estate. Her parents were horrified when they saw her enter, filthy and clutching a strange child. I'll explain everything later, she panted. Call the doctor, now." The physician arrived quickly. After examining the boy, he reported that the child was suffering from extreme malnutrition and body pain. "With proper rest and medicine, he'll recover," the doctor said. Lizelle thanked him sincerely. The doctor gave her a strange look. "How could things have gotten so bad that you'd let a child suffer like this?" She quickly clarified. "We didn't starve him. He was like this when I found him. The important thing was that he would live." And yes, he was the main character. Even now, just wiping the dirt from his face, she could see a glow returning to his cheeks. She couldn't understand how such a small child had ended up like this. Then she remembered the backstory. L'Appel's father, Duke Hylos's son, had fallen in love with a commoner. They lived together happily, even having L'Appel before they were married. The Duke opposed the union, of course, but after his death, they finally wed. Tragically, they were killed in an accident on the way home. L'Appel, the only survivor, had hidden himself in a garbage dump. Lizelle's joy faded. She had been so focused on the reward money, she hadn't stopped to think about the child himself. He had just lost both his parents. She felt a pang of guilt and considered apologizing when he woke up. But, in the end, she decided not to say anything. They wouldn't see each other again after she got her reward. In the novel, the Duke had immediately recognized L'Appel and doted on him. He'd take good care of the boy. There was no need for her to worry. Later, the man from the estate brought L'Appel to the Duke. "This boy is your nephew," he said. "Just look at the hair and eyes. Only members of the Hyllos family have those features." The Duke studied the child, then nodded. "Yes, he looks exactly like my late son." The man smiled nervously and mentioned something about the reward, but the Duke's piercing gaze made him fall silent in fear. Still, the Duke did reward him. For his effort, if not for his greed. "Put it all on the table," he'd told the butler. He had even brought L'Appel's favourite juice, and he wanted to make sure every coin of the promised money was there. Meanwhile, the man gave the boy a glass of what he claimed was the best juice in the world. The boy took a sip, but before he could react, the Duke's expression darkened. Furious, the Duke stood up. "How dare you lie to me?" he barked. "You think I wouldn't notice? This is your child, isn't it?" His voice echoed through the hall. The Duke wasn't fooled. "You're not the only clever one here. You thought I'd fall for it just because he's young and pitiful? I have to check every child now because of people like you, people who think the Duke can be deceived." Disgusted, the Duke called the guards and ordered them to throw the man out. "I don't want trash like that anywhere near my estate," he muttered. If only he knew what the real boy looked like, this would be much easier. Back at the mansion, Lizelle's parents were in complete shock when she told them the child was L'Appel Hyllos. Her father stared at the boy, stunned. "Isn't this the same child who disappeared after the accident?" Lizelle explained calmly. "I found him unconscious and brought him here. He needs help." But her father frowned and turned to his wife. "He can't be our grandson. Lizelle's only 20. Lizelle didn't understand why they immediately jumped to such a conclusion. "I'm not saying he's ours," she said. "As soon as he recovers, he'll be taken to the Duke." She asked them not to block the way and requested Dalai to check the boy's condition. It was time for her parents to leave the room. Her mother, meanwhile, gave her a bundle of clothes. Lizelle's childhood clothes. Marcin had brought them down from storage. Lizelle was surprised. "They've kept all my old things so carefully." It made her realize how deeply her parents loved her. How did such kind people end up with a daughter like the one I replaced? Just then, the boy began to stir. Lizelle approached him gently. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. She placed a hand on his forehead. His fever was gone. The boy looked at her, eyes wide, and whispered, "Mum." Lizelle smiled sadly. "I'm not your mother," she said. His expression crumpled, and tears welled in his eyes. Where's my mum? Where's my dad? It hit her then. He didn't remember. The trauma must have caused him to lose his memory. He couldn't even recall their faces. It was far too much for a child. You don't have to cry, Lizelle said, picking him up in her arms. Everything will be okay, I promise. Your family is waiting for you. Once you're better, we'll go see them. The boy blinked at her. You're not my family? She shook her head gently. I'm just Lizelle. He repeated her name softly, and she smiled. And you are Elle. I'll call you Elle, okay? The boy nodded, calmer now. His tears had stopped. Lizelle could already tell he was a clever and sweet child. All you need to do now is get better, she said. What do I have to do to get better? He asked. It's simple, she replied. Eat your medicine and your rice. But first she needed to clean him up. Time for a bath, she said. I only wiped you with a towel earlier, but you still smell like, well, trash. Elle looked horrified. I don't want to bathe. You need to if you want to grow up healthy, she said patiently. The duck-shaped tub was already prepared, and she carefully checked the water temperature before helping him in. Elle shrieked at first, splashing and protesting, but eventually she coaxed him into the water. Afterward, wrapped in a towel, he looked much better, clean and almost glowing. You're very cute, she said. You're saying that just to flatter me, he pouted. Lizelle laughed. All right, I won't praise you unless you really deserve it. When it was time to eat, Elle sulked again. I don't want to eat any more. So Lizelle used the classic airplane trick. Here comes the plane, she said, zooming the spoon toward his mouth. To her relief, Elle giggled and opened wide. She managed to land the spoonful of rice perfectly. He liked it. And that made her smile. After the second spoonful, Elle paused and asked, What's an aeroplane? Lizelle smiled and gave a simple explanation. It's like a carriage that flies through the sky. Lapel's eyes lit up with wonder. He was completely delighted by the idea, giggling as the spoon airplane flew toward his mouth. But as she watched him, the main character felt a sudden wave of doubt. What am I doing? She thought. She had planned to hand him over to the Duke as soon as he recovered, yet here she was feeding him, playing games, and watching over him like he was her own. Earlier, Elle had refused to bathe, saying the water made him feel like he couldn't breathe. Now she understood. He must have been trapped underwater during the accident. The cart must have fallen into a river or lake, and this tiny boy had somehow survived it. He was only 5. Lizelle's heart ached. What kind of fate has this child endured? He was so small, so fragile, and yet he'd lived. And not just lived, but smiled, laughed, and asked curious questions. How could a child who had suffered so much still be so sweet and smart? She couldn't understand it, and she couldn't ignore it either. Such a boy deserves love, she thought. He shouldn't be left alone. Lizelle made a quiet decision. Until he was safely in the Duke's care, she would take responsibility for him. She would protect him. Come on, she said gently. Let's go meet your grandparents. Far away, in a cold, shadowy place, a masked man lashed out at his subordinates. He still hadn't found the boy's body. He needed it, for reasons only he knew. Back at the estate, Lizelle reassured Elle. Don't be scared, she said. My parents don't bite. She brought him to meet her mother and father, who were immediately enchanted by him. My goodness, her mother said, kneeling down. How can such a cute little creature exist? Paul looked up at her, startled, then turned to Lizelle and whispered, There's another you standing over there. Lizelle laughed. That's my mother. That's why she looks like me. Her father chuckled and stepped in to say hello, but Elle leaned close to Lizelle and whispered, That one definitely isn't you. I don't know how to explain it. Soon, her mother clapped her hands and invited everyone to the table before dinner got cold. Lizelle encouraged Lapel. You can call him Grandpa, okay? Lapel beamed. He was so excited to eat on his own, but Lizelle noticed something. You're not eating your carrots, she pointed out. He frowned. You have to eat everything to grow up strong, she said. Even the carrots. You're a mean laddie, Lapel muttered with a pout. Her mother laughed and turned to the Baron. Do you remember? Our daughter was the same. She never touched carrots. And don't forget the bell peppers, her father added. Lizelle groaned. Why are you bringing that up now? Lapel giggled as he watched the way his grandfather ate, mimicking him for fun. Then he leaned over and whispered, Can you ask him to be a little quieter? That night, as Lizelle tucked him into bed, she whispered, Sweet dreams. I'll see you in the morning. But Lapel clutched her sleeve. Don't go. She paused. Are you in pain? He shook his head. That wasn't it. She suddenly remembered. He had spent so much time in a filthy, terrifying dump. Of course he didn't want to be alone. You want me to sleep here, with you? She asked. He nodded. So she climbed into bed beside him. And in the quiet darkness, Lizelle held him close, gently promising herself that she'd stay for as long as he needed her. Afterward, she decided to sleep beside him, and the boy fell asleep right away. Things were getting complicated. The more attached she became, the harder it would be to hand him over to the Duke. The next morning, Lapel happily showed his grandparents a drawing he had made. With excitement, he pointed out each person. Grandpa, Grandma, Lizelle, and Marchand. They were all overjoyed. He is a genius, her father said proudly, a pure artist. Even the butler was stunned. He drew me too? They had spent so much time together lately that none of them wanted to let him go. When Lizelle asked them to stop clinging, they begged for one more day. But she stood firm. We have to think about his real family too, she said. They're worried sick. Lapel, however, was thrilled. He thought they were going to his home. Lizelle didn't correct him. She was glad he had recovered faster than expected. If he had stayed any longer, her heart might have broken, and that would make it even harder to give him up in exchange for a reward. I need the money, she reminded herself. Just forget about him afterward. The butlers at the Duke's estate finally allowed them entry. Lizelle was stunned by the sheer size of the garden. What's that? Lapel asked, pointing at something shooting into the air. That's a fountain, she replied. He was awestruck. This house was much bigger than Lizelle's. The girl had known the Duke was rich, but this mansion screamed obscene wealth. A well-dressed butler greeted her and said he would go fetch the Duke. It would only take a moment. While they waited in the grand reception room, Lapel whispered, He's a really handsome butler. Lizelle was too nervous to reply. The luxury of the mansion made her feel strangely small. Lapel noticed. Are you okay? He asked. She forced a smile. Of course, everything's fine. A few minutes later, the Duke entered. Sorry to keep you waiting, he said, introducing himself as Chester. He was, in a word, stunning. Tall, refined, and sharply dressed, his appearance was almost unfair. Too much beauty for one man, Lizelle thought. Mother Nature really went all out on this one. Without thinking, she muttered, He's so hot. Then froze. Did I just say that out loud? She panicked. Hopefully he didn't hear it. Apple, confused, tugged on her sleeve. Is he hot like food? Does that mean he's tasty? Lizelle nearly choked. Murphy's Law really only applies to time travellers, she thought. This is a setup. The butler gently interrupted to say they could begin discussing matters now. Lizelle quickly reminded Lapel to stay quiet while she spoke to his uncle. The butler left to prepare refreshments, and Lizelle apologised for not introducing herself earlier. I'm Baron Frozen's daughter, she said. and this child is the one you've been searching for." She turned to Lapel and encouraged him. "Go on, say hello." Lapel stepped forward and politely greeted the Duke. Lizelle noticed the intense way the Duke was staring. It was obvious. This boy was his nephew. In a separate room, the butler confirmed to the Duke that the young woman waiting for him was, indeed, Baron Frozen's daughter. The Duke narrowed his eyes. Another waste of time? Rumours about her had reached him, rumours that she lived a life of luxury and had nearly bankrupted her family. She must have found this child somewhere and brought him here for a reward, he thought coldly. The butler didn't argue, but said, "It's possible, but we must be certain." After that, the Duke told the butler he would speak to the woman himself. The butler was puzzled by his master's decisiveness, especially considering what kind of person she seemed to be. The Duke was convinced she was only after the reward to satisfy her own greed. The butler quietly remarked that the previous swindlers had driven his master to despair, people so shameless they would sell their own children for money. It was disgusting. The Duke had vowed never to see such people as human beings again. Lizelle wasn't even sure she had imagined it, but Chester had been staring at her with a strange intensity. In his mind, Chester decided this woman was the lowest of the low. No decent person would bring such a skinny, weak child here. He was convinced she had deliberately starved the boy to make her story more believable. Turning to the child, the Duke asked, "Is it true? Are you Leland Halos?" Lapel nodded. "Yes. Lizelle told me that's my name now." That answer made everything fall into place for Chester. He then asked Lizelle where she had found the child. She hesitated. If she told the truth, he might be upset, but better a bitter truth than a sweet lie. Chester assumed she was trying to come up with a more convincing story. "It was the dump," she finally said. Immediately, Chester saw it as a ploy to earn his sympathy. "Who was he there?" he asked coldly. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Lapel added, "Lizelle told me I don't remember anything because of the accident." Chester narrowed his eyes. How cunning, he thought. She coached the boy to say that, just to avoid any detailed questions. But he wasn't going to be fooled. He would expose her lies on the spot. "What makes you so sure he's Lapierre?" Chester snapped. Lizelle was stunned by the hostility in his tone. "He's lost his memory. He doesn't even remember his name, so how could you possibly know he's my nephew?" she responded angrily. "Because you told me you were looking for a boy with black hair and red eyes. I brought you exactly that. And this is the thanks I get?" Chester was convinced she was just another fraud, but her confidence unsettled him. Why is she so sure of herself? Now Lizelle understood the coldness in his gaze. He didn't believe her. He thought she was lying. Forget it, she thought bitterly. No man this rude should be allowed to look that good. The two stared each other down, locked in a silent but intense battle. "They're playing a staring game," Lapel observed cheerfully. "I'm rooting for Lizelle." At that moment, the butler knocked on the door, and when he saw the two of them still glaring at each other, he paused in confusion. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, "but I have something urgent to report." Chester sighed. "What now?" "There's been an accident," the butler whispered. "A shelf collapsed, and all the bottles of magic dispelling potion were shattered." Chester was horrified. "There's nothing left?" "I've already ordered more," the butler replied. "But the ingredients are rare. It will take at least a month for them to arrive." Chester clenched his jaw. "Without the potion, I can't expose this fraud right now," the butler cautiously suggested. "Perhaps, for now, it would be best to send the lady home?" Turning to Lizelle, Chester apologized stiffly. "Unfortunately, I won't be able to issue the reward until next month." Lizelle blinked. "Are you saying you think I'm a fraud?" "There have been similar cases," he admitted. "So yes, I'm suspicious. Caution is wise." She swallowed her pride. Your caution may be understandable, but saying that to my face is still incredibly rude. She didn't know what kind of man he was. But one thing was clear. She didn't want to see him again. It's time for us to leave, she said curtly. She told L'Elle it was time to go and asked the Duke to contact her once the potion arrived. But Chester stopped her. Leave the child here, he said. Lizelle turned back, stunned. Excuse me? I meant you can go, but leave him. L'Elle shrank back in fear. Chester's status as his uncle was undeniable, but he clearly didn't believe it himself. And now he was asking her to leave the boy behind? No, Lizelle said firmly. I won't do that. Chester assumed she was after the reward. If you're truly honest, he said, then I swear on my name that I will repay you. But I must ask you to leave the child. That's not the point, Lizelle snapped. I'm responsible for him until you accept him as your nephew. She turned to leave, L'Elle clinging to her hand. The conditions here are far better than in your home, Chester said. Why don't you want to leave him here? Are you saying the conditions in my house are bad? She shot back. Then she knelt and asked L'Elle directly, Do you want to stay here or come home with me? I want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's, he said without hesitation. Lizelle stood. You heard him. Chester was livid. If you take him now, you'll get nothing, he warned. But the butler stepped in. Please, wait, he said. If you leave now, it may be dangerous for both of you. Lizelle looked at him, confused. The butler lowered his voice. The Halos family has many enemies. In the original story, there were constant assassination attempts and conspiracies. If rumors spread that you're hiding a child of the Halos family, innocent people could get hurt. He looked at her solemnly. Please, consider this carefully. It could be traumatic for the boy. Still, the Duke was determined to expose her lie. He wanted to see her continue pretending that her words and actions were sincere. Chester believed that it wasn't enough to simply brainwash a child. You also had to appear genuinely caring. The level of calculation involved astonished even him. You're having trouble deciding, the Duke added. You may stay here with him for the month. Lizelle was so surprised she had to ask him to repeat himself. The butler, too, thought he had misheard. She was given a room in the mansion. The boy was absolutely delighted. His room was spacious and beautiful. Lizelle admitted, it was all very lovely. The butler told her that he had already informed her family that she would be staying with them, so she didn't need to worry. He introduced himself as Ran. Lizelle then asked if she could request a carriage for the next morning. She needed to return home briefly to pack her things and explain the situation to her parents in more detail. L'Elle doesn't like waking up alone, she added, so I have to be back before he wakes up. That means I need to leave early. Ran promised to handle everything properly. Internally, however, he was skeptical. As Mr. Chester said, she really is a magnificent swindler. She's even keeping up the act in front of him. Ran believed she would fall for the luxury of the mansion and take the bait. After all, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. He resolved to report her every move to his master. Still, the butler couldn't help but wonder why his master was so fixated on her. That night, Lizelle asked L'Elle why he wasn't asleep yet. The night sky is really beautiful, he said. I want to have a star from it. Lizelle smiled. We can't just take stars. We'd get caught. L'Elle's face fell. But I really want one. Feeling sorry for him, Lizelle decided to play along. Well, I did catch a star, she said, holding out her empty hands. The boy's expression fell again. There's nothing there. Of course there is, she insisted. All the stars in the world are in your eyes. L'Elle's eyes lit up. Really? I can see them, and there are stars in your eyes too. Her heart ached. This little one, he's making me melt completely. She couldn't help but laugh. Now that we've caught the stars, L'Elle said, let's sleep. Everything had gone wrong that day, but she still had to take care of the boy. In the morning she was so tired she fell asleep in the carriage. A sudden jolt from the carriage hitting a stone woke her up. She had gone home early that morning, exhausted. Convincing her father to let her leave for an entire month had been incredibly difficult. Still, she wanted to return quickly and rest properly. She told the coachman to stop for a moment and stepped out. "I'll be back soon," she said. As expected, the market was busy. There were stalls selling everything, from magic tools to food and trinkets. She guessed there must be decorations with stars too. Finally, she found it. Real stars may be mortal and out of reach, but this would do. She was certain L'Elle would be thrilled. Then she spotted it. A beautiful glass ornament, shimmering like a captured star. He'll love this. But just as she was about to approach it, she ran into the Duke. The butler, Ran, was also surprised to see him. "We've already prepared the carriages, sir," he informed the Duke. "Then let's go," Chester replied curtly. Ran hesitated, then asked, "Are you sure you want to go there personally, sir?" "I'm just fulfilling someone's request," the Duke answered. Rand hoped this trip would be worth it, that the man really had useful information. Still, he knew the truth would only come out at a face-to-face meeting. Gretzky had also reminded the Duke to finish his business quickly. There was still a scheduled meeting with the elders. Rand sighed. Since the master would be passing through the market, he just hoped he wouldn't get distracted. Afterwards, the gentleman asked, "What about the woman and the child?" "The boy is sleeping, and the Ms. left early this morning to visit her house," Ran replied. Ran then snapped. "Stop indulging her, and stop buying those magic balls. We already have more than enough." Chester was running late. It was time to move. Rowan tried to get his attention, asking not to be ignored, but no one listened. Suddenly he remembered his brother's words, how his son loved stars. "I watch the night sky," his brother had once said, and he smiled with such sweetness. That smile could touch anyone's heart. Rowan had believed that one day his brother would be able to see that smile too. Chester had never thought those would be his brother's final words. He was probably still worrying about his son, even now. "Don't worry, Leon," Chester thought. "I'll take care of L'Elle's happiness." But first, he had a few minor problems to deal with. He'd assumed Lizelle was still at home, but she appeared just then, saying she had finished her errands and had stopped by on her way back. Chester told her to take her hand off him and walk around as she pleased. Lizelle blinked, confused. She had touched him first. The saleswoman interrupted, praising their excellent taste. "This magic ball glows when you press the button. It's the last one. We've nearly sold out." Lizelle decided she had to get it for L'Elle. "I touched it first," she said firmly. "We touched it at the same time," Chester argued. Thinking fast, Lizelle teased him, hinting at his fondness for collecting cute trinkets. He admitted it was a nice hobby. Just then, a child's voice piped up. "Mum, Dad, look! Auntie and Uncle are fighting over a toy." Lizelle had her pride, but she wasn't backing down now. She looked around and guessed the voice belonged to Ran. Taking advantage of Chester turning away, she quickly snatched the ball from his hands and told the shopkeeper she'd buy it. Chester was indignant, but the victory was hers. Lizelle thought it was a beautiful day. Chester observed how happy she looked. It's just a toy, he thought. She's not a child. Is she really happy over something so small? He found himself doubting his assumptions. Could a woman obsessed with luxury find joy in something so simple? But he almost believed her act. Lizelle called to him, telling him to hurry up. Even her innocent smile, he told himself, was part of the deception. "I'm coming," Chester said coldly. She thought he was rude and turned away. Suddenly, shouts rang out. People were warning her to move. She didn't even have time to finish her thought before she noticed a carriage speeding straight toward her. A crowd gathered. The coachman apologized. The horses had gone wild. People asked if she was okay. "I'm alive," Lizelle said dazedly. Chester's voice came from beneath her. "If you're alive, could you please get off me?" She realized that when she'd turned around, he had stepped in front of her, and she had fallen onto him. Thanks to him, she wasn't injured. She thanked him and joked, "I must be heavy." "It's good we weren't hurt," was all the Duke said. Chester approached the man whose carriage had caused the chaos. "You dropped these boxes. They look heavy. I'll help." Lizelle watched. "He's definitely not the man of my dreams, but he seems like a good person." Noticing a cut on her hand, likely from the fall, she went over and mentioned that his hand was injured too. Chester turned away. "It's none of your business." Lizelle felt like a fool for thinking well of him. "He's nothing like me. He's not honest. But he did help people, and maybe that counted for something." She continued her shopping, buying the magic ball and a few other small gifts for Elle. In the end, she had 2 boxes full. She felt satisfied. "We didn't buy anything for Elle, and he's the one who invited us as guests," she mused. "If the Duke doesn't mind spending money, why shouldn't we get him something nice?" Back in the carriage, she thought maybe she should have gone into an expensive shop just to empty the Duke's wallet a bit more. The carriage suddenly stopped. Curious, she asked the coachman what happened. "Basin's carriage broke down. A wheel came off. They can't go further." "Lady Frozen is heading to the Hertz mansion," he added. "You'll be travelling together." Lizelle sighed. Should I even try to talk to someone so rude? She asked the Duke if he wanted to ride with her. He replied calmly, "Go ahead, I'll wait here." "Just as I thought," she muttered, saying goodbye. But the servant stopped her. "Please wait." The servant again asked the Duke to ride with the lady. Chester finally agreed, remembering the nobleman's words. He had to return quickly for a meeting. Lizelle had said she needed to get back before Elle woke up. There wasn't time to waste. They rode together, both clearly unhappy. The carriage was crowded, so they sat opposite each other. With every bump, their bodies touched. Lizelle nearly suffocated and was baffled by his long legs taking up all the space. Each jolt made the situation worse. Chester tried folding his legs, but that only made his knee bounce more. Lizelle didn't understand why he didn't sit like before. She had no space left. Chester, annoyed by her pushing his legs, thought, "At least I'm trying to think of her comfort. She only thinks about herself." She wanted him to sit properly again. She's such a cheater, he thought. The carriage turned suddenly, and Lizelle began to fall. She was furious. But Chester wasn't even paying attention. He was staring out the window. Of course, she thought, short legs, I'll just have to endure it. She wanted to sleep, but found it impossible. Eventually, though, she lay down and managed to fall asleep. Chester was shocked. She's actually sleeping, after everything. He looked at her sleeping face. At times like this, she looks like an innocent child. Then his mind drifted somewhere he didn't want it to go. He quickly composed himself. "I know better than anyone that you can't judge someone by their appearance or their clothes." He remembered being beaten once for interrupting a nobleman. His brother defended him, saying Chester was still a child. But their father had snapped. "Leon, don't interfere." A father should love his child more than anyone, but he acted like a cruel bastard, Chester recalled bitterly. That's why you should never jump to conclusions about people. Meanwhile, the lady was still sleeping, and the gentleman had started to suspect that she was only pretending. But then, quite suddenly, she fell headfirst against the carriage window with a loud thud. Chester was shocked. How had she not felt that? The impact had been loud enough to make him wince. They had hit a rocky stretch in the road, and he was beginning to worry she might be tossed around the carriage. Acting on instinct, he reached out to catch her head before it could hit anything again, telling himself it was just a reflex. To his surprise, she clung to his hand and murmured, "Mummy," in her sleep. Chester blinked, bewildered. What kind of strange woman is this, he thought. She's completely eccentric, nothing more. Meanwhile, back at the estate, the servants were struggling to calm Elle. The boy was crying, calling for Lizelle in distress. One of the maids knelt beside him, gently explaining that she would return soon. Just then the butler arrived and asked what was going on. The maid quickly reported, "He didn't see Miss Lizelle when he woke up, sir. We told him she would be back soon, but he's inconsolable." The butler was surprised. It seemed the child had already made several loops around the living room in search of her. The staff apologized, saying they were quite busy at the moment but would give a full report later. Ran, observing from nearby, joked, "I believed in them. That's why she promised to come back before he woke up." Peering out the window, he noticed a carriage arriving. His face lit up. She's back. The boy will calm down now. Inside the carriage, the Duke was still holding Lizelle's head, trying not to draw attention. The moment the butler opened the carriage doors, Chester quickly let go and shifted to look out the window. Ran stared at the scene, confused. "What happened to your carriage? Why are you two returning together?" Chester replied calmly, "The wheel broke. We hit some rocks and had to come back together." Just then, Lizelle stepped out of the carriage, looking dazed and rubbing her head. "I'm fine," she said with a groan. "Probably just bumped around a few times while I was sleeping." The Duke raised an eyebrow. "You were fine when you hit your head, but the moment you wake up, suddenly everything hurts?" He decided it was best to ignore this insidious woman until the potion arrived. As he stepped inside, the master of the house was taken aback to see Elle running frantically, the servants chasing after him. Lizelle was taken aback when she saw the boy immediately rush into her arms. Elle began to cry, accusing her of being cruel and expressing that he didn't understand why she had left him alone. Lizelle's heart ached for him. The butler observed how deeply attached the boy was to his mistress, but the gentleman, Chester, reminded him not to let his guard down until they had all the facts. If anyone noticed anything suspicious, they were to report it immediately. As the boy clung to Lizelle, the servant suggested that she leave her luggage behind, but Lizelle insisted on handling it herself. She was exhausted and longed to rest, but first she needed to calm the boy down. Lizelle approached him and asked why he was crying when she was there. Elle sat sobbing, pleading with her not to abandon him. Lizelle, perplexed, explained that she hadn't left him, she had just been away on business. The boy kept repeating that if she left him again, he would be alone. He then mentioned having to return to the dump, which made Lizelle feel ashamed. She hugged him tightly, reassuring him that she would never, ever leave him alone. Elle asked if she was being sincere, and Lizelle promised that she was. She then asked him to wait for a moment while she went to the gifts. Lizelle told Elle that if she were leaving, she wouldn't have bothered to buy him a present. She asked him to hold the magic ball for now, and closed the curtains. The boy was confused, especially as the room was growing darker. Lizelle wanted to show him something special. She asked Elle to watch carefully as she pressed a button on the ball. Instantly, the ball began to sparkle, and the room filled with twinkling stars. "These are real stars," Lizelle said. The boy was mesmerized, his face lighting up in awe. "These are your stars now, Elle," she continued. "This is your home, and no one will ever drive you away." The boy, overjoyed, pressed himself against her. Though they would part soon, Lizelle wanted to keep this promise to him. Yet, deep down, she knew she couldn't keep it forever, and that made her feel guilty. Meanwhile, the woman who had taken the boy was now in the Duke's mansion. The masked man asked if they were sure it was the same boy. The servants confirmed that he had black hair and red eyes. The woman, they noted, was the Baron's daughter. The masked man froze. "Is this the vain girl we've been talking about?" he asked. He then turned to the servants and sighed. "Is that all you found out? You've had all this time and this is what you've come up with? I could have learned more from gossip." Furious, he quickly called Hazen and ordered him to dispose of the trash. The servants begged for mercy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. Hazen asked what the plan was now, and the gentleman responded, We'll start with the magic sphere. Ran, looking on, noted, from what we've learned, the accident wasn't an accident at all. The target was Leon himself. Chester slammed his hand on the table in frustration. Who would dare do such a thing? He then asked about the list of suspects. The butler explained that there were too many enemies within the family, making it difficult to narrow it down. It would help if we had testimony from the only surviving witness, Elle, he added. The butler had no idea where his master was headed, but Chester said he needed to see the knight's commander. Ran was surprised. You're going, personally? He asked, before requesting that Chester wait in case he needed to be called. The gentleman, however, said he wanted to get some fresh air and asked the butler to bring Warden. Maybe someone holds a grudge against me, but I don't remember having any enemies, Chester mused. I need to find the culprit and learn the truth. As Chester passed by the servants, he overheard one of the maids asking another if she was afraid of the Duke. They say he might have killed his older brother to take the title, she whispered, shuddering at the thought. It's a terrifying possibility. Another maid scolded them, warning, keep quiet, the walls have ears. The conversation shifted to the assumption that Chester had killed his brother for the title of Duke. Killing your own brother for power is a mockery of family, one of them said. He needs a scapegoat to clear his name of this fratricide. The Knight Commander noticed Chester's arrival and immediately assumed something had happened. Chester ordered him to assemble a reconnaissance team of the best knights. When the commander asked what they should be looking for, Chester silently handed him a piece of paper. The commander read it, disbelief evident on his face. Is this true? He asked. Chester nodded. And the knight agreed to carry out the task. Take Warden with you, Chester added. I need her help on this. The gentleman then told the butler he could leave. I need to be alone for a while, he said. Chester sat on a bench and stared at the sky, feeling the weight of his pent-up anger. The rustling of the leaves around him provided a slight sense of calm, so he decided to stay there for a bit longer. Suddenly he heard the voice of the boy and assumed they were playing nearby, but he still wanted some peace. It was too noisy. Chester thought, we need to find somewhere quieter. Meanwhile, the lady and the boy were playing with the magic ball when Lizelle was startled to see the gentleman there. She quickly apologized for disturbing him, explaining that the boy had simply misjudged his strength, which was why the ball had flown all the way over. She couldn't quite understand the look on his face. Chester calmly passed the ball back to her, but Lizelle noticed something disturbing. The same wound he had sustained because of her, and it seemed like it hadn't been treated. This worried her. She asked if he had treated the wound, pointing out that if he hadn't, he could get tetanus. The Duke, seemingly unfazed, didn't understand what that was, especially with how serious and angry she seemed. He waved it off, saying it didn't matter and that he'd take care of it later. But Lizelle insisted he had to treat it in front of her. If you get sick, I'll feel guilty, she said firmly. The gentleman continued to downplay it, claiming everything was fine. Turning to the maid, Lizelle asked her to leave Elle with Kay and bring the first aid kit. Chester noticed how quickly she was giving orders, and it seemed like she was trying to hurry him away. He couldn't help but feel like she couldn't stand being around him for even 5 minutes. Lizelle, noticing this, said, If you think I'm happy to be around you, it's not true. I feel guilty about the scar, not to mention the possibility of you getting ill. I don't want to sit here idly while you risk getting worse. The maid returned with the first aid kit, and Lizelle thanked her before preparing to treat the wound. Chester, observing her, realized she was quite a restless woman. Lizelle, however, was determined that he wouldn't think she was trying to confuse him. Sitting there like a good boy, Chester surprised her, but Lizelle didn't want to be the one to back down. If he didn't want her help, then he'd have to treat it himself. No one needed tetanus here. Meanwhile, Elle had grown tired of waiting and was ready for bed. Lizelle, turning to him, asked, Are you ready for bed? The boy nodded, mentioning he had already put on his pajamas. Lizelle smiled, praising him for his independence. "Then let's wrap ourselves in a blanket and get some rest," she said. L'Elle smiled back, wishing her a good night. As she tucked him in, he suddenly asked, "When will we go back?" Lizelle was surprised and asked, "Where do you want to go back to?" He explained he meant his grandparents' house. Lizelle agreed, but only if he promised to eat well, play, and grow strong. She didn't understand why the boy was so sad, and in that moment she wondered if it was because he had bad taste. But the 5-year-old sighed heavily, his small shoulders slumping in front of her. Lizelle didn't want to lie to him, but she couldn't promise when they would return. However, she knew she needed to distract him somehow. "Would you like to take a walk around the city?" she asked. "We can make it a tour, and we'll go to a shop with sweets and toys." The boy's eyes lit up, and he eagerly agreed. They quickly decided to get ready, but first they needed to get Chester's permission. Lizelle went to Chester's office, unsure of how he would respond. She suspected he would forbid the walk, thinking it could be dangerous. Even when they simply walked through the garden, Kay and Tia always accompanied them. Lizelle had grown tired of this constant supervision. She tried to figure out how to ask for time off so they could have some privacy. The butler met her in the corridor and asked if she had business with Chester or if she was afraid of disturbing him. He reassured her that she didn't need to worry. Lizelle told him she would be entering Chester's office, and when the butler said that Chester would never allow it, she decided to press on. She knew he was stubborn, but she couldn't just give up. After all, she had promised the boy. She argued that it was very important for him to explore the world at his age, but Chester insisted that if there was nothing urgent to do, they should stay at home. Lizelle noticed the bandage on his hand and pointed it out, commenting that he had treated it himself. The butler was surprised to see his master wounded. Lizelle noted that Chester had torn the skin off his arm. Chester dismissed it as just a scratch, but he admitted that he was worried about getting tetanus, so he had treated the wound. The butler asked what tetanus was, and Chester, flustered, admitted that he wasn't sure but had treated it anyway. He quickly changed the subject, telling the butler they should focus on more important matters. Lizelle, turning to the butler, asked, "What's typical of our Duke?" She had seen how horrified Chester was when she took his hand, not even knowing if it was due to his nobility or just his pride. Meanwhile, the man was in complete shock when he heard that she was going to take a walk around the city. The lady reminded him that he had said it was dangerous, but if there were several people accompanying them, everything would go smoothly. After a moment of hesitation, he reluctantly agreed. Lizelle was very grateful and quickly thanked him, saying she would be on her way. The Duke, however, realized that she had deliberately put him in an awkward position in front of the butler, especially after he had initially refused her. She was certainly clever. L'Elle was overjoyed. "Mom, look at all the toys!" he exclaimed, rushing ahead. The boy was so excited that he even called her Mum. Lizelle reminded him not to run too far ahead. She thought they were simply going for a walk, but she hadn't realized how much of a spender the boy was. She only had 1,000 shillings, and now she was already considering selling her necklace to cover the cost. The girl offered him something sweet, and he happily accepted. Lizelle was relieved that everything had worked out without much financial strain, but suddenly a thief appeared behind her. The lady screamed, urging the guards to catch him. L'Elle was stunned, but Lizelle quickly noticed the thief and shouted for help. Knight rushed to her side, instructing her to stand behind him. Another knight remarked that the thief was fast, so much so that they couldn't catch him. The lady, frustrated and upset, was reassured by one of the knights who said he would check on her condition, but in the meantime she should stay with the other knight. Lizelle's safety was clearly a priority, but the knight asked if she was okay and assured her that his friends would bring her purse back soon. L'Elle, undeterred, told Lizelle that he would protect her and instructed her to stand behind him. Just as he spoke, the thief tried to escape, but Lizelle grabbed the boy in her arms and called for the knight. The knight, with swift reflexes, tripped the thief, causing him to fall. Lizelle hoped that this wasn't just some kind of time traveler's rule, where the hero always has to be the one to make the dramatic move. She was glad the situation had turned out in their favor, but she was still nervous. Elle, noticing something on the ground near the thief, reached out to touch it, but Lizelle quickly stopped him. "Don't touch anything," she said, walking ahead to check on her belongings. Kay, the knight who had chased the thief, asked his partner why he hadn't caught up with the thief. The partner explained that the thief was simply too fast, and once he realized he couldn't catch him, he turned back. Lizelle was grateful, though she downplayed it, saying it was just a coincidence. Still, it had been a relief to get her bag back. Afterward, she quickly snatched the bag from the child's hands. Lizelle thought she could have done it more carefully, as she almost tore the boy's arm off in her haste over the unfortunate bag. The woman then decided to offer Lizelle some jewellery, claiming it was a gesture of gratitude. She insisted that Lizelle take it, saying she wanted her to wear it for her health before running off immediately. The necklace seemed expensive, and everything about the situation felt suspicious. Lizelle couldn't help but wonder. After all, not all aristocrats carry spare diamonds in their handbags for emergencies. Even the thief had acted clumsily. The woman thanked Lizelle, not the knight who had tried to help her, which seemed odd. Perhaps the necklace was cursed, she mused. Elle suggested they go another way, pointing out that something interesting was happening there. Everything seemed so shiny. Lizelle was caught between the temptation to sell the necklace or keep it. It was hard to resist her natural greed. Elle, on the other hand, was delighted to see a real star. The seller, noticing their interest, said this was the last music box and offered to sell it for only 1,000 shillings. Lizelle noted how difficult it would be for a beggar, especially one with a child in her arms, to turn down such an offer. Her heart would break with every refusal. Elle asked if they could have it, and she decided to sell the necklace. The buyer informed her that the diamonds were fake, but he could still buy it, though the price would be much lower. Lizelle felt a twinge of sadness that the diamonds were fake. But at least they could live comfortably now. 2,000 shillings for a beautiful design wasn't so bad. Elle, curious, asked why she was so happy. Lizelle explained that they were going to buy him a star, and that's why she was pleased. She also decided they should spend all the money, so she ordered drinks for everyone at her expense. Everyone was happy, and it was clear how easily money could lift people's spirits. Meanwhile, the masked man was horrified when he found out she had sold the necklace. He threw his glass at the servants, furious. They apologized, explaining they hadn't anticipated this outcome. He yelled at them to be quiet, saying they didn't understand how rare the magic stones in the necklace were. They needed to retrieve it immediately. The man, in a panic, rushed out of the room, lamenting how insane it was to sell such a rare item so carelessly. He stressed that she should have worn it, as it met all the beauty standards for the season. His servant asked if he should handle the situation, but the man responded, stating they should wait for her to wear it. They needed to keep an eye on her house. Who knew what she might do with the stone neck? The servant agreed, remarking that her actions were quite unpredictable. The master, after a moment, decided to send his servant off to deal with it. He instructed the servant to bring him good news, and they would await the results. Meanwhile, Lizelle was feeding the boy in the garden when the servant reported to the master. So far, nothing unusual had been noticed about her. She cared for the child, and there was no sign of violence. However, a small incident had occurred a few days ago, where she had instructed the servants to prioritize Lizzelle's interests above their own. Something else interesting had come up during the inspection of the Baron. The Duke wanted to get straight to the point. Just before his arrival, the lady had sold all her luxurious dresses and accessories to help the Baron pay off his debts. The butler wasn't sure that a vulgar girl, someone who gossiped, could do something like that. Perhaps she had changed. Chester, frustrated, remarked that the servant was too trusting and should believe him. People don't change for no reason. But the servant urged the master to consider his words carefully. There was a possibility that the rumours were greatly exaggerated. Even the most obvious lie could seem true if enough people repeated it. After a while, Chester looked again at the girl and the boy in the garden. He remarked that it was too early to draw conclusions and that they couldn't take their eyes off her. Rand, however, knew that no matter how long he stared, he wouldn't see anything new. She was a different kind of star. A spotless sun. The master didn't understand why his servant was so fixated, but he said he was already on his way. Lizelle was playing hide-and-seek with the boy, shouting that if anyone didn't hide, it wasn't her fault. She thought he was such a sweet boy, especially with those tiny, adorable feet. She pretended not to know where he had gone, looking around and acting like she couldn't see him. It seemed like he had run in the opposite direction, but she knew she had to teach him how to hide properly, just in case he wanted to irritate the Duke. Lizelle said she would look one way, then check under the chair. Elle knew he couldn't let that happen. If she found him there, she'd win again. So, he decided he would definitely win this time. Lizelle offered him a head start and started counting to 100. Elle understood he had to run faster, but had no idea where he could hide. Rand turned to the boy and asked if he was in a hurry to do something important. Elle was overjoyed to see the butler and asked if he could help him hide. Rand realized that he was playing hide-and-seek with Lizelle, who was notorious for being a hide monster. The butler agreed to help and said they'd come up with something. Maybe he could just carry Elle in his arms, since Lizelle was short and might not even notice him. But Elle figured that wouldn't work. They might be better off hiding in the living room or library, or maybe they could go full speed ahead. Elle quickly decided they should go full speed ahead. Then he realized he needed to be quieter. Lizelle would be coming soon. Lizelle noticed that it had become unusually quiet. The butler did everything Elle asked. The cook, however, yelled at him to slow down, warning him that the floors had just been mopped and he might fall. Lan called out to Elle, urging him to listen to the warnings, or he could get hurt. Elle, however, shouted back that he didn't care because he had just beaten Lizelle in hide-and-seek. Meanwhile, the men tried to catch up with Elle, but they slipped. Ran couldn't understand why they had decided to wash the floors at that moment. The butler had fallen hard, and Elle drew attention to him, but the gentleman reassured him that he was fine. Moles told the gentleman to be careful since there was a flower on the ground, but it was too late. Elle, however, was delighted by the sight. It was like summer snow. They continued playing with the little gentleman, and Lizelle had no idea where he could have disappeared to. She was sure she'd heard his voice nearby, but he wasn't in the living room. It was tricky. She thought maybe he was in the library. She'd have to search quietly, or else he might have hidden too well. The library was huge, making it difficult for her to search effectively. Suddenly, she noticed the key to her successful and happy life. The Duke was reading a book. Lizelle thought to herself that he was a man among men. If he could carry such a large ladder by himself, she would have hired someone to do it. It was almost as if there was a new medieval profession, ladder mover. But for something like this, what wouldn't you do? It must be fate. She asked him to continue showing the way to her wayward newcomer. There it was, the key to the happy life of a strong and independent woman. The book was called How to Turn 1,000 into 10 Billion Shillings. Given the characters of the Hyos brothers, it was unlikely they would have bought a useless book. Now it seemed possible to increase her capital. Lizelle decided she would pay off her debts, and the remaining 20 million that the Duke would give her would multiply many times over. Then, she would be able to live her own life. Suddenly, Lizelle began to fall, but surprisingly, it wasn't painful. It felt almost pleasant, as though she were being caught by someone. She realized Chester had caught her. He was so handsome, like a sculpture. And for some reason, her heart skipped a beat. This was crazy. She was losing her rationality. It was so much easier to think clearly about a 2D man when she was in her world and he was in his. The lady began to apologize, asking him to let her go. She needed to act as though she were ashamed, lowering her head so she wouldn't seem impudent. He looked down at her, his gaze almost detached, like he was examining his hand. It irritated her that he interfered even when she was busy with important things. Afterward, she apologized for looking in there without permission, explaining that she thought the boy might be hiding there. Chester pointed out that he hadn't come in yet. Lizelle quickly put the book down and began to leave, saying goodbye as she approached the door. Chester noticed that she couldn't lie convincingly. She had been in his head when she fell into his arms. This confused him, and he found himself wondering why he was remembering her face. He decided to see what kind of book she had been holding to her chest. When he saw it, he realized it was some kind of nonsense, not a book on investing at all. It had to be thrown out immediately. After reading a couple of paragraphs, Chester hoped that Lizelle wasn't acting this way because of the book. He couldn't believe he even considered the possibility that someone could become a billionaire just by reading something like that. Lizelle was embarrassed, especially since he was still holding her and her heartbeat quickened. She didn't understand why this was happening. He was absolutely unbearable. Louise's laughter echoed, but this was the kitchen, and she hoped he wasn't alone there. Lizelle entered the kitchen, saying she had found it, and then she was very surprised. She asked the butler if everything was okay. Elle called her to play with them. The lady was grateful they had been with him this whole time, and noted that she saw they had also been part of the battle with flour. She apologized, but they didn't mind. They were happy themselves. Elle, being the mischievous boy he was, played with the flour and then immediately went to bed. Lizelle couldn't even be mad at him, because he was just so sweet. The cat overheard the knights talking about who would be the first to enter. "Kay is so tired he needs to go to bed quickly," one knight said. Suddenly, they heard a strange crunch in the bushes. When they turned around, they saw a very cute cat. The knight apologized, but the cat couldn't stay there, so he decided to find its owner. After a huge burst of light, the cat possessed the knight, with the help of magic. Chester was in such a hurry that even his butler couldn't keep up with him. He quickly called Shane, who was surprised to see the gentleman had decided to meet them personally. Ran noted that Chester was so eager to hear the report that he came himself. The Duke immediately asked what had happened and told them to get to the point. Shane apologized, explaining that they had thoroughly searched all the way from Bern to the capital, but they had found nothing. Chester acknowledged their hard work and told them they could rest. Shane then suggested they expand the search area, but Chester said they should rest for now, because they would need strength for further searches. Shane understood and agreed to wait until they were needed. Ran pointed out that the killer must have planned everything carefully, since there were no clues. Chester agreed. They would need time and effort to solve this puzzle. He was also pleased when he saw Warden. The servant mentioned he would return the dog to the kennel, but Chester hugged the dog and said there was no need. "This little one has worked hard. You can't just shove him in," he said. So, the gentleman decided to walk with the dog for a bit. Chester then ordered Ran to arrange some delicacies for the dogs. The knight, Kay, was called and told they needed to patrol the house. He thought they were still looking for clues. After the guest's arrival today, plans had changed and they had to hurry. The gentleman noted that he had seen his pet enjoying the walk. Chester also apologized for having to stay indoors, as they had guests and his dog might scare them. He mentioned that the dog would need to wait a little longer until the identity of the boy was established. He recalled Leon asking Chester if he could handle Dobermans. Considering they were such a large breed, Chester's efforts had been thorough, and though he was a little busy now, they would walk later. If this boy was truly Elle, Chester would introduce them, and he would be happy to learn that his son had made a friend. Chester offered the dog something to eat and asked him to sit still. He promised to return soon, hoping the dog wouldn't be too upset about being locked in again. He noticed a woman having lunch with a child, treating him very well and praising him for eating his carrots. The woman remarked on how unusual it was, as it was always so quiet here. If he ever had a family, he imagined it might look something like that. Chester felt a bit out of place here, and it was time for him to leave. Lizelle decided to ask if his lordship had eaten yet. Chester admitted that he hadn't. Lizelle understood, though she didn't quite understand why he seemed so worried. After this, the chef presented the final dessert, and the boy was thrilled with it. Since he had already been noticed, there was no point in trying to escape quickly. The cook was glad to see his master. Ran informed him that the Duke needed raw chicken, and it had already been prepared. Lizelle asked for a moment to think. She was surprised, but realized that if she had such tastes, she'd be concerned too. Chester, puzzled by her sly look, hinted that they should leave to enjoy their chicken in peace. He began to prepare to leave. Chester noticed that Lizelle hadn't eaten, as she had been feeding the baby. He suddenly dropped by and asked her to finish her meal. Lizelle said she was already full and suggested he sit and enjoy the food. Chester said he would take the jacket with him, but Lizelle called out to him before he left. She told him that it was better not to eat raw meat, which surprised him. It was close to poisoning, and he needed to stay healthy. After Lapelle's comment, the Duke had no idea what she was talking about. Lizelle said that it was better to cook the chicken, boil it, fry it, or stew it, but just don't eat it raw. She added that she didn't blame him if he didn't know and wished him a pleasant appetite. Chester couldn't believe she thought he had asked for raw chicken for himself. This made him laugh. He noted that the more you got to know her, the more interesting she became. It simply couldn't be true. But it was. He had seen it with his own eyes. The guy said he must have mixed something up. The butler arrived and asked if the list of dishes for the week had been approved. Ran, confused by the atmosphere, thought something was off. The chef, wanting to tease the cook, remarked that he had seen the Duke laughing. The butler noted that this sometimes happened, and fortunately the Duke knew how to smile. But it wasn't just a smile. Chester had ordered the chicken for the dog, and the laughter echoed from the dining room. The chef, who had returned to make sure it was really him, heard the laughter and couldn't believe it. Ran asked if the laughter was really loud. It was the first time the chef had seen such a thing since he started his job. He thought the palace might be in disbelief too. The chef was stunned, but he said he'd beat the butler if he didn't understand. It was hard to believe, but the laughter was real and it had lightened the atmosphere in the house. Perhaps this was affecting the Duke. Lizelle, unsure where the boy was running, told him he might trip. Lapelle told her not to worry. It was better to hurry. He was always so energetic. After eating, it was hard to keep up with kids his age. Lapelle stumbled, but Lizelle said it was okay. The boy immediately started rolling on the floor. Lizelle rushed to him and asked if he was hurt or had any scratches. The boy assured her he was fine and stood up on his own. They had just bathed and combed his hair, and now he was dirty again, with blades of grass stuck in his hair. It was true that every day for a parent felt like hard work. She asked him if he had fun, and the boy said he wanted to keep playing. Lizelle reminded him to be careful and not get hurt. His happiness mattered most, but he shouldn't run too far. Lapelle was such a fidget. Suddenly, Lizelle heard the boy calling her, his voice full of fear. When she ran up to him, she saw a huge dog in front of him. The boy was terrified and crying. Lizelle told him to stay put and that everything would be fine. She would slowly approach him, but she couldn't move, knowing that if the dog suddenly attacked, it would be the end for the boy. She had no idea what to do. The dog sniffed the boy, but when the boy screamed at it to stay away, Lizelle urged him to calm down. The dog, however, was acting wild. Without thinking, she ran to the boy, picked him up in her arms and saved him from the dog. Afterward, the Duke approached them and told Walden to stop and quickly leave. He practically ran to them and asked the lady in horror if they were okay. Chester apologized for not noticing that they had come out here. Lizelle asked Lapelle how he was, urging him not to cry because everything was fine now. Suddenly the lady closed her eyes, and the boy asked in fear what was wrong with her. It was the stress that had built up, causing her nerves to act up, and she had no strength left. Her body felt like a mess, but she wanted to know if the boy was okay. The Duke rushed to her and asked if she was all right. Lizelle had no idea when she'd stopped getting into awkward situations right in front of his nose. She stood up and asked the boy not to cry, also asking if he was in any pain. Lizelle then asked Chester if he had heard that the boy wasn't injured, so he didn't need to worry. Chester looked embarrassed but repeated that he had been asking about her, not the boy. Lizelle noticed that he was angry again, and she didn't understand why. It was confusing. Why did she like him so much, even when he looked so upset? If someone had seen her face, they might have thought she had pushed him away, leaving him lying there, unhappy, exhausted and angry. Ran hurried towards his master and noticed that Chester was screaming loudly. He wondered what had happened. When he saw the lady, he was told she had just fallen, but the butler couldn't understand how this had occurred. He asked if she was okay, and the Duke asked if she could get up. There were some problems. She couldn't feel her legs. Apparently her body still hadn't recovered from the shock, and she didn't think she could stand up on her own. Elle was worried because she was hurt. Ran decided to ask what had happened. Lizelle noticed the gentleman's eye twitching, and since she was the victim, she wasn't angry. She said she thought her body was still in shock, which made her legs feel heavy. She told the boy not to cry and that she would rest and soon feel better. The gentleman asked the butler to take the child and bring him to the estate, but Elle asked to stay with the lady, wanting to accompany her. Ran assured him everything was fine and that the master would help Lizelle get up. Lizelle gave him the key to stop because she would have laid down on the grass and gotten up on her own. There was no need to carry her in his arms. Chester ordered the butler to bring the doctor to the lady's room immediately. She said she was fine, but Chester insisted on carrying her, which seemed odd to the butler. The doctor examined her legs and confirmed she was in a lot of pain. The gentleman thought it was serious, but the doctor reassured him that there was no need to worry. The bone was fine, it was just a slight sprain. She needed ice and to avoid putting any weight on her leg for a while, but it would heal soon. The doctor left and the Duke stayed in the room with her, which surprised Lizelle because it was directed mainly at him. She sat on him, falling right into his arms. She didn't understand why he was always nearby. Because of all this, she had already been in his arms twice, feeling his hard chest against her side. It was awkward, and she was mortified by the way everyone stared at them in the hallway. She felt like she would die of shame. She really wished he would put her down, as his face constantly reminded her of those. Chester turned to Lizelle and apologized, but she didn't understand why he was speaking to her in such a way. The Duke had to keep the dog on a leash, not risking the safety of his guests. He apologized again. Lizelle now knew the name of the dog, but she didn't understand why it was such a frightening creature. She reassured him that everything had turned out fine, so he didn't need to worry anymore. It was just an unfortunate situation, and the dog only wanted to protect the house. The Duke promised to compensate her for the trouble, asking how much she wanted. Lizelle jokingly asked if he could buy her a house. The Duke, in a serious tone, asked in which area she would like the house, how many rooms, and whether it should have a garden. Lizelle told him to stop, admitting she was just joking. She felt like she was living in a fairy tale. Maybe he had already become a billionaire thanks to that book, and his face promised to fulfill any of her wishes right then and there. But she couldn't take advantage of him like that. Instead, she told him to introduce her to the dog sometime. Chester was surprised by her request. Lizelle remarked that she wanted him to apologize in person. The Duke was shocked, and she said that would be more than enough. When he left, the butler asked how the lady was doing, and Chester replied that she simply couldn't walk for a few days. Ran was relieved everything worked out, but the boy screamed wanting to go to her and asked to be let go. Chester picked up the boy and told him not to worry because she would get better soon. For that to happen, he needed to stay quiet so she could rest. When she woke up, he had to protect her and make sure she didn't walk around too much. Chester asked if he could trust him with such an important task. Lizelle said he could rely on him and that the boy would protect her. Afterward, the boy ran off somewhere. Lizelle noticed that he looked a bit shabby and realized he had probably been too busy to care about his appearance because of Missy. Rowan observed how concerned his master was for her, something he never expected from Sir Chester. The gentleman was surprised by his own thoughts, and then remembered how he had asked her if she was wounded and ordered that a doctor be brought immediately. He had also carried her in his arms. Chester ordered Ran to fetch the potion as soon as possible, no matter what. He wasn't sure what feeling had come over him recently, but he had doubts about his judgments regarding her. If his suspicions were correct, the misunderstandings between them would need to be resolved quickly. In the kitchen, the servants were discussing how she had been lying on the grass with the boy in her arms. They couldn't believe it, especially since the boy was real. If it weren't, why would she rush to save him? She even got hurt herself and was now lying in her room. But it seemed more logical to run from such a large dog, a Doberman, rather than protect her son. Regina suggested that she was a hypocrite, possibly trying to seduce the Duke by using the boy as an excuse. They should think for themselves. No noble woman would go looking for a boy in a landfill, and she couldn't have just found him by accident, since the Duke's search party had already scoured everything. The cook proposed that this was indeed the case, and the maids also thought it was a bit strange, but seemed to believe it. Regina suggested waiting for the potion to arrive and then seeing what happened. The head maid asked why they were all gathered, as they had work to do. They told her they were working, but Regina had finished everything she was assigned and asked for a short break. The maid allowed it, saying Regina deserved it for working hard. The cook then decided to get back to his tasks, as he had forgotten about the deep dishes and the first course. Soup. It was important to monitor nutrition during a visit and diversify the diet. Regina offered to help with the soup, though the cook didn't quite understand why she looked a bit off. He didn't mind, though. Lizelle had planned to handle the situation herself, but Regina didn't agree with that and was determined to get revenge. Elle, however, said no way. Then, the lady complained that she was very thirsty, but the boy wouldn't let her get up, insisting that if she did, her leg wouldn't heal. It was better for her to stay still, and he promised to bring her something to drink. Elle was careful not to spill a drop, knowing Lizelle needed water to heal. When he handed it to her, she was very grateful, but the boy refused her thanks, telling her to drink it because it would help her get better faster. Lizelle wanted to tell him that her hands were fine and she wasn't paralyzed, but he insisted on giving her the drink from his hands. She thanked him sincerely, and he was pleased. He told her to never get sick again, and she promised she wouldn't. His sweet scent intoxicated her, and she wished she could stay like this forever. But with only a few days left before their separation, she knew she had to stop dreaming about things that wouldn't come true. It seemed like it would be hard for her without him, because he was her little hero. Elle said he would protect her, just as long as she stayed close and didn't leave. Lizelle didn't understand how she would cope without him by her side. She would miss him terribly, and also Tia. Tia had become like family to her, along with Rowan, Kay, and of course the Duke. But she wondered why the Duke was on this list. He was a nice man, but she wouldn't miss him for sure. He was hard to understand. His first instinct was always to get angry with her. Elle told her she had wrinkles. Just then, Tia came in and informed the lady that she had brought food for both her and the boy. Elle asked why she even got up, since he would have fed her himself. Lizelle apologized, but explained that she was feeling better, so she wanted to offer him something to eat before he insisted on feeding her again. She had to eat it quickly before he started insisting, and when she tasted the soup, she thought it had about 1 pound of salt for every litre of water. Lizelle's face remained unchanged. Perhaps someone had accidentally dropped too much salt in her dish, but she decided that no one had ever died from too much salt. She ate the soup anyway. Meanwhile, Hazen was supposed to report the situation through his magic ruby. He looked like the baby of the family, but he wasn't entirely sure yet. The potion hadn't arrived at the mansion, and the gentleman told him to continue observing and report anything important. Tia noticed the lady staring at the sky for a long time and asked what was wrong. Lizelle said it was nothing special. She just hadn't looked at the sky in a long time and couldn't help but admire it. Tia was surprised, noting that the view from the window was beautiful, but Lizelle said it wasn't the real sky. What she saw from her room wasn't the same. She must have been sad there. At least she had a reliable guard who wouldn't let her lift her finger. Lizelle didn't understand why the Duke doubted their relationship, because they behaved so similarly. Tia was glad she had recovered so quickly. It was just a sprain, so Lizelle was happy everything was healing well. It felt wonderful to expose her face to the light breeze. After so many days of confinement, it suddenly became much colder, and the lady realized she had dressed too lightly. She suggested that the boy go inside, but Elle said it was warm. Tia offered to bring her a cape, but Lizelle assured her it wasn't necessary, as she would get it herself. It was good for her to move around more now. Elle said he could play with the maid for now. When Lizelle took the oath, she felt so warm and soft. She decided to take something for the boy, just in case. The staircase had seemed too wide in the beginning, but she had grown used to it. It felt like this was her home, and she needed to hurry, because her own plans were probably already in motion. No matter whose little pranks they were, they wouldn't spoil her wonderful mood. Tomorrow, she was meeting the gentleman, and he remarked that he had heard she was feeling better. Lizelle confirmed this and said she was planning to take a walk. The gentleman agreed. Lizelle was very happy to see the Duke's dog near him, whom she had wanted to meet. Chester asked her to wait because he had prepared something for her. The dog brought her a flower and placed it next to her. Lizelle was very grateful to the dog and then asked the Duke if she could pet him. Chester allowed it, but told her to approach slowly. Lizelle was sure everything would be fine. The dog seemed like a well-behaved boy, but there's no such thing as too much caution. She was grateful for the trust he had shown and suggested that they forget the past incident and become friends. Even the Doberman had given her a flower. Not everyone could boast of that. But of course, the dog wouldn't have thought of doing that on his own, so most likely the Duke had rehearsed this with him. Lizelle didn't understand why he had done it. A simple apology would have sufficed. She hadn't thought the Duke could be so romantic. Perhaps something had really changed in his gaze. Chester's gaze softened, and then the Duke asked if she had anything to say. Lizelle immediately replied that she wanted to thank him. She remembered that he was thick-skinned and that she shouldn't have stared, as he might still think something of it. Lizelle noted that he could continue his walk, but she was already leaving. Chester asked the dog what was wrong. He assumed the dog was upset because the lady had left them, or perhaps the gentleman himself was feeling sad. But he remembered the image of the lady sitting sweetly with the dog, feeding him and praising him for needing to eat well. Elle asked if he could skip the carrot this time. If he did, Lizelle promised to give him a piece of pie. The boy asked for the pie first. Lizelle thought he must have woken up on the wrong side of the bed, but since he was a good boy, he needed to eat. The cook saw the Duke standing behind the wall and noted that he was early today. He also asked if it was necessary to set the table for the Duke. The cook was about to mention the Duke's favourite dish, but Chester said it wasn't necessary because he was just passing by. Lizelle was surprised and asked the cook if the Duke had left. The cook explained that the Duke had said he was just passing by, but had been standing there for so long that he decided to ask about breakfast. Perhaps he had been embarrassed to come in because of them. Lizelle was surprised that he couldn't come in because of her, and wondered why she hadn't realized this sooner. It seemed like he was following her around like a shadow, and she probably seemed blind to him. Tia noticed that Lizelle was sighing heavily and asked if something was bothering her. Lizelle said yes and no, then asked her to take a discreet look behind her. The maid was surprised when she saw the Duke there and didn't quite understand why he was hiding. Lizelle noticed that it seemed like he had decided to devote all his time to watching her, but Tia didn't understand why. She speculated that he probably still thought she was a fraud, and might even think she was capable of child abuse. Tia added that there had been many favours exchanged, so he would have sent them for something like that. But this answer surprised Lizelle. The maid wasn't sure anyone would go that far. Lizelle agreed and also wondered what other reason he could have. Tia thought that maybe he had something to say but was hesitating, or maybe he simply wanted to be closer to the boy. Lizelle realized this could very well be true. Maybe she should put her doubts aside and ask him directly. The Duke had no idea what he was doing, but then the butler approached and asked if he wanted to play with him. Chester noted that the Duke needed to be given more work to stop him from hanging around doing nothing and scaring people. Ran had just seen the gentleman standing there, looking toward Miss Lizelle. Chester explained that Dio wasn't making things up. He had simply translated them into two. The Duke blushed. Chester added that he was currently taking a walk, and if he didn't want to say something important, he could go. When the Duke opened his eyes, he saw Lizelle in front of him. It would have been better if he had stood behind the tree. Lizelle asked the gentleman if he wanted to play with them. The gentleman tried to calm down and firmly stated that he had no such desire. Lizelle then asked why he was following her like a shadow and if he really didn't want to play with the boy. The Duke was surprised by her words and asked if he could walk around his mansion since he could go wherever he wanted. Lizelle called him a coward and a liar, catching him red-handed. He still objected to her. She wished she could shove the serum down his throat right now. Now she realized that he didn't want to play. Chester didn't understand what kind of tone that was, because it sounded like she had some kind of complaint. Lizelle said that of course it wasn't so. His guest had simply forgotten his place for a moment. They continued to argue, but the butler stood between them, suggesting they calm down. Elle approached the Duke and asked him to play with him. The Duke was very surprised, but the boy kept asking. Lizelle asked Elle to come to her because he was busy following them around and couldn't play with them. Still, the Duke took him in his arms and said he would go and have fun with him. Lizelle got very angry and asked why she had answered something completely different just a couple of minutes ago. Chester noted that this was the boy's wish. It was excellent, no matter how you looked at it. The Duke had changed a lot during this time. Elle was eager to show the Duke his treasure, so he led him to his room. The boy asked him to go faster. The gentleman was surprised that the boy hadn't played enough yet. Chester had to go to work. Elle was upset, knowing this meant he wouldn't play with him anymore. Lizelle asked if everything was okay, or if he didn't consider it his wish. She agreed to let him play a little longer. Poor Duke. This wasn't the first time he'd been unable to refuse Elle, and he wasn't inferior to him in stubbornness. Only the methods were different. She felt like the Duke's wife because of these circumstances. Elle showed him the magic ball, saying that it shone very brightly. The Duke realized it was the same toy from the previous time. Lizelle noticed that the boy really liked the stars. Chester immediately remembered how his brother had told him that his son really liked the stars, and when he looked at the night sky, he would break into a very cute and happy smile. Lizelle noticed that the Duke was deep in thought again, probably wondering if the boy was real or not. If he accepted it, they could start getting closer, and she would feel better. The silence dragged on for a while, and Lizelle thought perhaps she needed to intervene. She turned to his lordship and remarked that Elle was a very responsible and caring child. He had taken care of her when she sprained her ligaments, and he was always reliable. He even sang magically, and she was sure the Duke had never had the chance to hear him sing. The Duke agreed, and Lizelle asked if he would sing for His Highness. Lizelle was very happy, because his little heart was about to receive a lethal dose of cuteness. No one could resist the charm of Lepel's singing. The boy was like a diamond in the darkness of the night, and even the Duke smiled a little as he listened. Chester suddenly became very embarrassed because he didn't understand why her eyes had lit up so suddenly. Lizelle noticed him rubbing his eyes while the boy was singing, and perhaps it was a hint of fatigue. Lizelle praised Lepel and asked His Highness how he liked the song. The atmosphere had returned to normal, and Chester thought he was imagining things. Lizelle didn't understand why he had such mood swings. She really wanted him to make a simpler face and praise Lepel because the boy was looking forward to it. She turned to him twice and asked if he would continue to remain silent. Chester only saw her smiling, with eyes shining brightly, and he didn't understand what kind of trick this was. He had to leave before he blurted out some nonsense, so he reluctantly praised Lepel with a very displeased face, and immediately ran away. The boy was upset because he thought the Duke was angry because he sang badly. Lizelle reassured him that it wasn't so. He simply had no ear for music, so he couldn't appreciate it at its true value. Just when Lizelle thought things couldn't get worse, they witnessed another transformation in the Duke. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She was so beautiful. He thought it was probably just fatigue, and his eyes and brain were playing tricks on him. He just needed to rest. Ran turned to His Highness and asked if he was feeling well. The Duke remembered his training and realized he needed to study right now, so he started to run off. The butler didn't understand why he was acting so suddenly. Ran shouted that it was impossible for the Duke to leave, as things couldn't be postponed. Everything was idle for them. The servant informed Lizelle that they had arrived and asked if she was sure everything would be all right, as they had arrived without warning. Lizelle reassured him that everything would be fine. There were no formalities between them, and there would never be any. Casey told her brother that she was home and screamed for everyone to meet her. "Damn, his lordship is busy right now," she said. Casey was upset because he most likely hadn't heard her, but she added that if the mountain wouldn't come to Mohammed, Mohammed would go to the mountain. The servant was about to tell her that in that case she should go outside because his lordship wasn't there. Lizelle was eating with Elle, who had finished his meal and was enjoying chocolate pudding for dessert. Casey couldn't find him anywhere, and her voice echoed as she called for him. Lizelle was surprised and asked if they had a guest. The maid noted that the voice belonged to Lady Casey. Finally, Casey found them, but was very surprised when she saw Lizelle and the boy there. She burst in and apologized, realizing that there were guests. Tita greeted her and informed her that his lordship was probably in his office. Lizelle thought about it and realized that she seemed to be like that in the novel, but she didn't understand what kind of person Casey was. Casey asked if this boy was Elle and expressed her joy that he had already been found. His red, bottomless eyes and black, fragrant hair immediately revealed that he was a child of the Hilos family. Elle started running toward Lizelle, saying he was scared. Casey apologized, saying it was her fault and she hadn't meant to scare him. Lizelle reassured him that everything was fine and that Casey wasn't scary at all. She didn't understand why the boy was still frightened. Casey then asked the lady who she was to the boy, assuming she was his nanny. She seemed to remember her now. This was the only daughter of Count Rashes. Casey explained that the Count and the Duke were close friends, so their children grew up together almost from childhood. That was why she could call Chester brother without hesitation. However, she felt a little impulsive and tactless, as if she and the Duke were really blood relatives. Lizelle was afraid for L'Elle's life, wondering if she should leave him in the care of such a girl. Casey remarked that the lady was too beautiful and young to be a nanny. After such an insight, Lizelle decided to take back her words. She greeted the lady and introduced herself properly, explaining that she had some unresolved business with the Duke and would be staying here for a while. Casey immediately understood that this woman was the extravagant queen and quickly apologized for her earlier impoliteness. Lizelle acknowledged that she used to be like that, but that was in the past, and there was no need to worry about her words. Casey's father always says that her tongue is her enemy, so she apologized again, adding that she called her Zelly. Lizelle was surprised and asked if that was a nickname. Casey explained that it was an abbreviation of her full name. She had just met Lizelle, yet was already addressing her like that. Afterward, the boy repeated Casey's words but mispronounced them, and Casey jokingly thought he was asking for jelly or marmalade. She then took out a gummy bear and showed him what her sister had. Lizelle thought it was remarkable. Casey seemed to have a magic bag. She could hardly believe that such a large amount of marmalade was in such a small bag. If Lizelle had mentioned that she liked it, Casey would have been ready to give it to her. The lady tried to say that it wasn't necessary, but Casey insisted that it could contain anything she wanted. It was a source of unlimited cash. Lizelle was taken aback, but still agreed that it was a cool thing, and Casey was thrilled that she accepted her gift. She then asked if the boy was really theirs. Lizelle confirmed it, adding that he hadn't yet passed the potion test. Casey thought she was the one who brought him here, and Lizelle confirmed that she had. Suddenly, Lizelle was bombarded with questions from Casey, who spoke rapidly. As they continued, Lizelle realized that even Chester couldn't seem to find peace. Something was wrong. He needed to pull himself together and control his actions. The Duke was very angry and training aggressively. Ran asked him to calm down, suggesting that the knights might think he was taking his anger out on them. Chester explained that he didn't mean anything by it. He simply wanted them to understand that there was room for improvement, and that was his concern. Ran replied that if Chester didn't want to kill them with care, he should give them a break. The gentleman asked why Ram was there again, assuming he was loafing around. But Ram informed him that Lady Casey had arrived and was now speaking with Lady Lizelle. The gentleman was very surprised and asked who she was talking to. He didn't understand why she hadn't come to him earlier and realized he should have moved faster. Ran asked his lordship to wait for him. They were already in Lizelle's room. The butler was shocked, wondering if the Duke wanted to come in person. Ran suggested that he wait in the drawing room while he brought Lady Casey there. The gentleman noted that Ran knew her well, and she wouldn't agree to persuasion. He remarked that Ran's suggestion was a matter of politeness. Ran believed the Duke was worried that Lady Casey might blab something, or perhaps he was embarrassed by the revelation of his dark past to Lady Lizelle. The Duke usually didn't care about such things, but he agreed that if Rand planned to continue his bullying, he shouldn't complain later about the mountain of paperwork. It seemed the butler had hit the nail on the head, and that was the whole reason for the Duke's haste. Casey remarked that she hadn't had this much fun in a long time. Lizelle was enjoying herself too. Casey offered to give her a quick test, and Lizelle agreed. Casey asked if Lizelle knew Chester's nickname. Lizelle was surprised and didn't know what to say. She wondered what would describe him more accurately. A cool, handsome man or a jerk? Everything else that came to mind contained swear words. Perhaps she shouldn't be so frank with her. So Lizelle said she wasn't sure. Casey noted that if she heard that nickname, she would definitely think of him. She leaned in and whispered, "He's the mouth that ruins everything." After that, they started laughing, loudly, and Lizelle noticed that it suited him very well. He was ideal. Lizelle hadn't even realized when she had last had such fun, almost as if she had found a kindred spirit. Suddenly, someone knocked. It was the gentleman, asking if he could come in. Lizelle let him in, and he apologized profusely for interrupting them, but she assured him it was no trouble. Chester then came in, asking Casey what had brought her here. The girl was scared and called him brother, then addressed him as His Highness. Lizelle hoped he wasn't in the service, as she laughed at his nickname. The Duke said that if she had anything to say, she could say it in the living room. Lizelle thought they were talking too loudly, and Casey agreed. Chester asked again, and the lady went out with them, saying they would discuss everything in the living room. Lizelle said goodbye to Casey, and once they left, a boy immediately approached her. He asked why her uncle had not greeted him, believing that he had stopped loving him. Lizelle denied it, saying that couldn't be true. She thought the boy must have overheard their laughter, but she reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. She hadn't given him that nickname. It would be rude to ignore a child, especially when he's a complete fool. Casey noted that Chester had asked why she was here, but she replied that it was obviously because her dad had told her to come. Chester then asked if she had said anything she might later regret. Casey answered, "Of course not," not understanding why she would discuss something personal with someone she didn't even know well. The gentleman then arrived, mentioning that she had something to say, though he seemed very long-winded about it. Casey quickly shifted the topic, asking if the boy had been found. She needed to change the subject before Chester began helping her. Chester said he wasn't sure yet because the potion hadn't been delivered. Lizelle noted that she would never do such a thing. The boy simply lost his memory from shock, but the Duke believed it was better to be safe than sorry. Casey reassured her, saying that this girl could be trusted. She had heard her out and forgiven her. Chester, still confused, asked why Casey was calling her this girl when they had known each other for only 5 minutes. Casey remarked that it was a display of female solidarity, something she could understand. Chester commented that he knew that already, but Casey suddenly yelled at him for what he said. He agreed that she was beautiful, but the Duke interjected, saying that hadn't happened. Casey apologized for what she had heard. Chester nearly got caught in an awkward moment, and his symptoms were worsening. He had recently shone so brightly that he had to retreat immediately. The Duke thought perhaps it was some kind of mental illness. He decided Chester needed to see a doctor to find out if there were any mental disorders. Lapel, happy with the treats, expressed excitement about them. Lizelle was surprised by how much he liked them, and the boy said she was cool, even a sorceress. Lapel asked for more treats, even suggesting he wanted a puppy. Lizelle explained that she could only create 3 things in a short period, and the bag needed a break. For now, he had to make do with what he had. Lapel didn't mind and eagerly took the treats. Lizelle, feeling exhausted, had been so distracted by the boy that she hadn't realized how tired she was. She was already falling asleep on the go. Despite needing a short rest, she couldn't leave the boy unattended. Lapel told her it was time for him to go home, but he also asked her to play with him since he was sad to play alone. Lizelle, still half asleep, realized he wanted to play with her. However, Lapel, being her protector, hesitated to wake her up. He opened the door but noticed no one was there. He decided it was time for hide and seek, needing to find everyone in the many rooms of the mansion. Tired of looking, he wandered into a room full of stars and was delighted. Meanwhile, Lizelle woke up as though she had fallen into a coma. She realized Lapel was missing, and the door was wide open. Panic set in. She couldn't imagine where he had gone, and with such a vast mansion, he could be anywhere. She started looking for him, but silence was her only answer, meaning he must have gone far away. She encountered a maid and asked, terrified, if she had seen the boy. The maid shook her head, confirming she hadn't. Lizelle had no idea what to do, but she was certain that if something happened to him, it would be her fault for falling asleep. Tia, the maid, suggested they look together. She would search the kitchen, maybe he had gone there. The Duke, on the other hand, was fuming. The doctor had confirmed that Lapel had no symptoms of any condition, but the Duke's concern had shifted to Lizelle. He was beginning to suspect his own feelings for her. Chester, confused and feeling off, wondered why he felt like the Duke was smirking at him. Why was he heading in this direction? The Duke had made it clear that no one was to enter Lady Lizelle's room without permission, but the door was open. Chester barged into the room, demanding to know who dared to disobey orders. Just then, he ran into Lizelle, who was in tears and begging for help. The butler, horrified, asked what was going on. Lizelle explained that Lapel had disappeared. She had accidentally fallen asleep, and when she woke up, he was gone. Ran reassured her to calm down. He would contact the others and they'd find him quickly. He was sure Lapel hadn't gone far. There were guards everywhere. Lizelle blamed herself, but Ran insisted she stay calm, and he would bring news soon. Lizelle, though, insisted on helping with the search. The Duke was furious. He had clearly ordered no one near the room without his permission, so who had disobeyed that order? He was determined to find the culprit and make sure they never did it again. Chester stormed into the room, demanding to know who had dared defy the order. Meanwhile, Lapel was very happy when he saw his uncle Chester. Chester didn't understand why Lapel was there, and the boy hugging the little star explained that he had found a place where all the stars hide during the day. He had discovered this room, where they were all so beautiful. Everyone had been hiding from him, but he had found them. Chester was confused. In all fairness, the boy should have been escorted out and scolded for being in this room, which was meant for someone else, but for some reason, he didn't want to do that. It was strange, but Lapel seemed to fit in. Lapel begged his uncle to play with him, but Chester refused. The boy insisted, as he was very bored playing alone. Eventually, Chester agreed, but only for a short time. Lapel said it was cool, but asked his uncle not to stand there, and instead to lie down and admire the stars with him. Lapel explained that if they lay down on the floor, the stars would shine even brighter. Chester lay down next to him, but he still didn't understand why Lizelle wasn't there and why he was alone with Lapel. The boy explained that Lizelle had fallen asleep, but he hadn't wanted to wake her up because he was her protector. Chester told Lapel to forget about the little spy and be careful with him, as he could easily blurt out too much in front of Lizelle. The Duke had already made mistakes because of her influence. Despite the doctor saying there were no health issues, Chester was still concerned and thought the only right decision was to keep his distance from her. Elle offered to sing Chester a song to keep him entertained. As he sang sweetly, Lizelle suddenly appeared in front of them. Chester thought it was odd, like a mirage, since she hadn't been in the kitchen or anywhere else he usually saw her. The butler, having heard a boy's voice from the other side, was relieved to find that Elle was safe. Lizelle, worried and relieved at the same time, embraced him and scolded him for leaving without permission. The boy reassured her that he was fine and that he wasn't alone. He had the little star with him. The gentleman came out of the room and, seeing Lizelle, became concerned. Chester, confused and trying to clear his head, asked the butler what was going on. The butler explained that they had been searching for the boy everywhere because Lizelle had been so upset. Lizelle apologized for causing such a commotion, and the gentleman acknowledged that he was partly to blame for not expecting her to be so worried. Grateful, Lizelle thanked him, but suddenly she began to feel faint, and the butler caught her. She apologized for her legs giving way, explaining it was just nerves. The gentleman, noticing her distress, suggested she rest. She jumped up immediately, saying she could go, but Chester insisted she should rest. The boy, sensing her discomfort, told her to go faster so that the stars would help her and she wouldn't feel sick anymore. Lizelle was surprised when she entered the room Elle was playing in. The maid had told him that this time he wouldn't be able to get away from her so easily. Lizelle noticed the calm in the Duke's mansion again, and for a moment everything seemed peaceful. She wondered when the potion would arrive, and she hoped to return home soon. It was clear that Elle needed to adjust to his new surroundings, and Lizelle felt that everything would work out for him. After all, he was the nephew of the stubborn Duke, so everything would be fine. She hadn't expected all the toys the Duke had bought for Elle collected in one room. Perhaps Chester felt guilty for not being able to save his family, and that was why he tried so hard for his nephew. Lizelle understood now that the Duke was willing to humble himself for the sake of Lapelle's happiness. She found herself surprised by his efforts, and as she relaxed, she began thinking about leaving. She hoped to avoid changing the course of history, certain that the people in this mansion could overcome their struggles without her interference. She was sure that once she left, it would all end, and she would never see Lapelle, the Duke, or the good people of the mansion again. She might visit occasionally, but that would be the limit of her involvement. Her thoughts were interrupted when the servants whispered about Chester. They were shocked, saying that Chester had caused the incident and that he had done it to inherit the title. They believed all his actions, searching for Lapelle and trying to find the criminal, were just a pretense. Lizelle, furious, confronted the servants, demanding to know who had spread such rumors. They were terrified and tried to cover up their words, but Lizelle demanded they answer. She couldn't believe they would slander an innocent man like that. Just then, Chester, having overheard the gossip, decided to take a break. When he opened the window, he saw Lizelle, who looked beautiful and embarrassed him when their eyes met. Meanwhile, the butler entered the room and, assuming his master was tired, offered him some tea, but the master declined, saying he wasn't in the mood. Ran asked Chester where he was going, and Chester replied that he was going for a walk. His head had finally cleared and he felt better. It was time to return. If he kept going straight, he would inevitably run into her. It was better to turn back before he lost control again. He didn't want to believe that these obsessive thoughts couldn't be controlled. He was sure there had to be a cure. Suddenly he heard voices. One of them was blaming him for everything. He was shocked. He was hearing this in his own estate. Chester decided that he didn't care anymore. He just wanted to return to his usual routine. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and he was certain it wouldn't be the last. Then he heard a female voice demanding to know who had spread such rumors. It was Lizelle. Chester was surprised to see her. She asked the servants who had told them such things, and they tried to deflect, saying that everyone was talking about it. Lizelle pointed out that if everyone was talking, it meant they had proof. The servants stammered, admitting they probably didn't have any evidence. Lizelle, unimpressed, reminded them that they were servants and should not be spreading baseless rumours about the master of the house. It was clear they were tired of living, she said, and warned them to watch their language in the future. The Duke was not the kind of man who would behave like that, and she would not stand for such talk. She then asked them why they had gathered here today. They hadn't been given the day off, so they should be working, not gossiping. Chester stepped out of the bushes and asked Lizelle if she planned to stay outside any longer, noting that the wind was picking up. Lizelle was taken aback, surprised by how quickly he had appeared. She felt embarrassed. He had seen her, scolding the servants as if they were children. Determined to escape the situation, Lizelle decided to leave and take L'Appel back inside. The Duke offered to walk with her, which she assumed was because he was worried about the servants gossiping behind his back. Despite this, she didn't understand why he was following her. She knew she had to say something, so she apologized for the scene she had caused. The Duke, confused, didn't understand what she meant. Lizelle explained that she was referring to the rumours. As a guest, she shouldn't have gotten involved, but she assumed he must have felt terrible, and it couldn't have been easy for him. The Duke assured her that everything was fine, and that she didn't need to worry about it. This answer surprised her. Lizelle couldn't understand how he could remain so calm. He wasn't guilty of anything, so there should at least be some presumption of innocence, and he shouldn't remain silent, otherwise she wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Chester, slightly irritated, asked her how she could be so sure it wasn't him behind the rumours. Lizelle responded that she was sure because he wasn't the type to do such things. She added that if he were guilty, he wouldn't have gone searching for L'Appel, nor would he have bothered decorating the room with stars. Chester was taken aback. She acted as though they had known each other for years, and she seemed to understand him so well. Her complete trust in him, without any hint of doubt, made him feel strange. Lizelle noticed the redness of his face and thought he might be in pain, but Chester assured her that he wasn't hurting anywhere. He was just feeling sick, maybe a chill or a fever, but he refused to let her check his forehead. Meanwhile, the maids discussed the situation, glad that only Lizelle had scolded them. Regina, however, was suspicious of Lizelle. She didn't trust her and thought she was playing a role in front of the Duke. She was concerned that Lizelle was manipulating him and wanted her out of the picture. The chef, unsure whether Lizelle's condition would improve, noted that the doctor had advised her to drink more fluids. Perhaps she had overexerted herself while playing with L'Appel. It had been cool yesterday, so it wasn't surprising that she had suddenly fallen ill. The chef instructed the maid to check on Lizelle and ask if she wanted any special dishes, as it would be a sin not to feed a sick person something comforting. Regina, still upset, bumped into Tia, who immediately apologized. Regina muttered about Tia being a strange assistant, but Tia just smiled and asked if she could help. After the guests had left, all she seemed to know how to do was disturb others. Regina reported that she had brought all the spices the chef had asked for. The lady, pretending to be sick, had been so committed to her role that a few days ago she had been searching for the boy with tears in her eyes, all for the sake of a fleeting but intense hug from Chester. Her scheme had worked the first time, and now she was shamelessly continuing it. However, their relationship wouldn't be destroyed by her dirty tricks. That day, Chester had chosen her, and nothing would change that. The chef thought the lady had suddenly become possessed. She had brought soup for the lady, urging her to eat it, and L'Appel asked her not to die. The lady reassured him that she was fine, but the boy cried, accusing her of lying since she could barely move. Tia comforted L'Appel, telling him not to worry because the lady would get better soon. Lizelle asked the maid to take the boy away, fearing he might get sick. Tia agreed to take him for a walk, but L'Appel refused to leave, saying he needed to stay with Lizelle. After some insistence, Tia finally managed to take him away, urging Lizelle to rest. Lizelle was grateful for the help, but she knew she couldn't afford to stay in bed for long. Her immunity was weak, and she didn't understand how she could fall ill from a simple walk. She had been here for 3 weeks now, and soon she would have to say goodbye to L'Appel. She needed to get back on her feet quickly and spend more time with him. Chester, meanwhile, kept thinking these were symptoms of some strange disease, but after looking through all the books, he realized it could only mean one thing. He had fallen in love with her. He couldn't believe it. It was simply unbelievable and unthinkable. She wasn't extravagant as rumors suggested, and he was sure she doted on the boy. There was no talk of violence, but the fact that he had fallen for her in such a way felt strange. Determined to make sense of his feelings, Chester decided to review some books again. As he remembered her, he realized he was losing his mind. These thoughts, these mirages, were constantly occurring. Ran, the butler, approached and asked if Chester had finished with the documents. Chester was surprised. Hadn't he asked Ran to wait? He'd told him he would handle the documents soon. Then, Chester asked Ran what he liked most about his wife. Ran was confused, not understanding the intent behind the question. Chester commented that there must be something about her that made him marry her, which caused Ran to grow uncomfortable. He suspected something was off with his master. The sudden interest in Lady Lizelle was a change, and his intuition told him it had to do with something deeper. Chester, noticing Ran's hesitation, asked him not to look at him that way, or he would feel awkward. Ran, ever the expert in such matters, advised Chester that love was something hard to explain. Sometimes it simply happened. You could wake up one morning and realize that you loved someone. Chester, though skeptical, listened as Ran continued, saying that love was more about people's feelings and their ability to compromise than any specific event. He didn't believe that everything Chester had been doing could be explained by anything other than love. Suddenly the maid knocked on the door and asked if she could enter. Chester granted permission, and she informed him that L'Appel wanted to see him. Chester didn't mind and asked if something was wrong. The boy ran in, shouting that Lizelle had died. Chester immediately corrected him. She had only caught a cold. Lizelle was afraid she might infect the boy, so they had made sure he stayed away from her. The maid explained that she was still feverish and resting in her room. Ran saw this as Chester's opportunity and urged him to court the lady. Chester was perplexed by what Ran was suggesting, but soon found himself holding a bouquet of flowers that the butler had handed him. Ran had suggested he pick some flowers which were in season, and even mentioned that they had medicinal properties to help with fever. He assured Chester that it was necessary to help the lady recover faster. Despite his hesitation, Chester decided to visit her. He wasn't sure if the flowers were truly needed, but Ran's insistence made him feel as though it was the right thing to do. As Chester approached her room, he thought about what Ran had whispered in his ear. All women liked such gestures, and Chester should act on his feelings. When he reached her room, Lizelle greeted him quietly, not understanding why he had come. She wanted to rest, but she allowed him to enter. Chester stood there, unsure of what to say. The butler, shocked by his master's behaviour, hoped that Chester hadn't forgotten how to speak. Chester remembered Ran's advice about romantic gestures, so he presented the bouquet to Lizelle. She asked what kind of flowers they were, and Chester said he had found them on the way. Ran, watching from a distance, hoped this wouldn't be misinterpreted as a romantic gesture. But it seemed that Chester had indeed taken a step forward in his feelings for her. After handing the bouquet to the lady, Chester realized that something must have gone wrong. Tia entered the room, announcing that she had brought boiling water. Lizelle was surprised, as she hadn't requested it. The Duke remarked that it would definitely be useful and handed her a glass of warm water. He added that he had heard these flowers could help with colds and were already clean, so she could use them without further preparation. As Lizelle looked at him, she couldn't help but think that Chester was acting like a charming gentleman, seemingly so gallant and sweet. If he continued like this, she thought, he could win any woman's heart. But suddenly she realized she wasn't thinking about him in that way anymore. Moreover, it was Tia's job to care for her, so she didn't understand why he had come to her room with such gestures. Was there a catch? Chester, sensing the tension, suggested that she try the warm water, perhaps subtly implying that she shouldn't infect the boy. Lizelle responded, saying that she preferred to be alone to avoid accidentally infecting anyone, so he needn't worry about her. Chester was taken aback and asked again, as if still unsure. Lizelle, in turn, remarked that she couldn't believe he had gone through all this trouble just so she wouldn't infect L'Appel. He could have simply told her. Ran, noticing Chester's confusion, became worried. The Duke seemed frozen by the sharpness in Lizelle's response. At that moment, a servant entered and announced that the gentleman was waiting for Chester to review the city documents, meaning it was time to get back to work. Frustrated, Chester shouted that he had trusted Ran, but couldn't understand why his plan had failed. Ran noted that it was a normal reaction, given how Chester had treated her, like a fraud since the beginning. Naturally, she wouldn't respond warmly to his gifts right away. Chester was stunned. He had never considered this angle. Ran told him to think for himself. He had long been dismissive of her, so it wasn't surprising she hadn't opened up to him. Chester still couldn't figure out what to do. Ran suggested he needed to slowly resolve the misunderstandings between them, instead of expecting everything to be fixed with one gesture. Chester had thought that simply waiting for the potion to take effect would be enough. But now, he found himself completely unsure about what had gone wrong. Everything felt out of place, and he could feel himself distancing from his original goal. Ran reminded him to be more careful in the future, promising not to put him in an awkward position again. As Chester reflected on everything, he realized that his approach had been a waste of time. His mission had shifted from winning her trust to managing a situation he hadn't anticipated. He needed to act quickly. There was no longer any time to waste. Just then, the knight entered and mentioned that the commander was looking for Chester. Chester nodded and made his way toward him, knowing that today he had a task to focus on, whether he was ready or not. After the child, it seemed they wanted to assign him something else. The commander informed him that he had called him regarding a request for assistance with a carriage crash incident. They now needed people for a second investigation, which is why he invited him. Kay knew it would involve an investigation, so he frankly admitted that he didn't think he was good enough to be involved. The commander was confused by this sudden change, as Kay had shown interest before. It wasn't the Kay the commander knew. Some had even said that he had been training less diligently recently. It seemed something had happened. Kay quickly denied any such change, explaining that he had simply been feeling a bit tired lately. He assured the commander that he would train harder and, of course, could be included in the investigation. The commander acknowledged that Kay was a good guy, but reminded him not to relax too much. He couldn't afford to be complacent, especially when dealing with such serious matters. As for the investigation, Kay felt he was being treated like a fifth wheel, under constant surveillance. He had climbed a tree earlier and had decided that he no longer needed to be in that situation. His body fell from the tree, and it would have been strange if he simply disappeared, so he left himself there for now. The memories of his time spent in the stone had already faded, and he was ready to move on. Lizelle, meanwhile, was dealing with a different matter. She had sold a rare bag, which left Casey in shock. She couldn't understand why Lizelle would sell such an item, but Lizelle replied that it was necessary to get rid of unnecessary things. Later, L'Appel called Lizelle and listed the names of some items he had mentioned, to which Lizelle commented that they were very impressive names. She even called L'Appel a genius for his taste. Casey didn't understand why they were calling him a genius over a list of names, but Lizelle added that there was something elegant about them. Lizelle sneezed, and Casey asked if her cold had passed. Lizelle assured her that it was over, and simply thought the room had been chilly. She was about to close the window when a cat suddenly jumped in. The cat's appearance was unexpected, and Lizelle didn't know where it had come from, but L'Appel was delighted. Casey, taken by the cat's beauty, tried to pet it, but the cat rejected her. She didn't understand why the cat had turned away from her, considering she could have pampered it for life. Lizelle reminded her that cats could only be petted with their permission. The cat then walked towards Lapel, and he was thrilled, thinking it wanted him to pet it. Meanwhile, the cat sat comfortably on Lizelle's lap, much to Casey's excitement. Lapel commented that Lizelle was very cool, and that the cat seemed to enjoy her company. Casey, feeling jealous, wished she could pet the cat too, but Lizelle's calm approach had won the cat's affection. Chester, back at home, was surprised to learn that Casey had come to his house. It seemed that Lizelle had been gossiping about him, though Chester didn't think Lizelle liked that sort of thing. However, he wasn't sure whether Casey was gossiping too. It annoyed him, so he decided it was time to send her home. Ran, the butler, was surprised to see Chester leaving when he had wanted to speak with him. Chester told him to come back later, since he had urgent business. Ran insisted that it was of utmost importance, and Chester reluctantly agreed to listen. The butler informed him that the potion had arrived. The magician had found one and immediately sent it. He also mentioned that it would be sufficient to test just one child. Chester was pleased with the news and praised the butler. Ran asked if he could call Lizelle and Lapel right away to use the potion, but Chester hesitated. He didn't want to tell Lizelle yet and preferred to keep the investigation confidential. Ran was taken aback by this response, but Chester insisted that they wouldn't tell her just yet. The butler then asked if the potion needed to be returned, to which Chester replied that it would not be necessary. They would keep it for now. Chester's mind was clearly preoccupied with Lizelle, and Ran noticed it. He remarked that Chester didn't want to let her go home so soon. Chester hadn't even realized that his desire to keep her around had clouded his judgment. The palace was the last place he needed to be, but he had to stay focused. He ordered the potion to be prepared and decided he would bring it to Lapel himself. Meanwhile, they were both very happy about the cat. Casey told Lizelle to enjoy the moment and gently touched the cat's paw. Casey was absolutely thrilled, asking how it felt. "It's so soft," she said. "I can't even describe it in words." Lapel told her she was very lucky, admitting that he wished he could experience the same. Casey felt a bit jealous and wondered why Lizelle seemed so affectionate toward the cat. She mused that perhaps Lizelle wanted to keep the cat for herself, maybe even to become its mistress. Lizelle, however, didn't think so because the cat already wore a collar, which meant it had an owner. Still, they were all confused about what to do next. Just then, Chester knocked on the door and was allowed to enter. The gentleman apologized, and Lapel was pleased to see his uncle. Lizelle asked what the gentleman had said, mentioning he would like to take the boy with him. Suddenly, the Duke noticed the cat, and he began to worry that his perfect disguise had been discovered. Chester, looking puzzled, asked what kind of furry creature was sitting in the lady's lap. He was clearly suspicious, and the rumours about him seemed to be true. They needed to show him that the cat was harmless. Lizelle didn't understand what was wrong because the Duke was scaring the cat. She explained that the cat had come into the room through the balcony and had probably gotten lost while wandering around. The Duke seemed confused. How could she have climbed over the balcony when even the trees' crowns were so low? Lizelle shrugged and said that her master lived there, asking Chester if he knew who owned the cat. Chester replied that as far as he knew, no one in the house had a cat. In that case, Lizelle suggested they care for the cat until its owner was found. However, the Duke was adamantly opposed to this. Casey, Lizelle, and Lapel were all confused as to why he was so adamant about not keeping the cat. Chester explained that the butler was allergic to cats, but Casey didn't even know about it. Lizelle insisted that she had no choice but to take the cat home. Chester, visibly angry, said that no one could leave the creature alone with the lady. He forbade it, declaring that no one, especially not a cat, would win Lizelle's heart before him. The lady was perplexed about what to do with the cat, but Chester said he would hand the cat over to the butler to find its owner, even if the butler was allergic. Casey seemed to understand the situation. Chester assured them everything would be fine as long as no one touched the cat. He then apologized, saying he had come for the boy and would return shortly. Casey laughed, finding the whole situation amusing. It had been a long time since something this entertaining had happened right before her eyes. She overheard Chester's thoughts and realized that he genuinely thought Lizelle was cute. Casey couldn't help but ask Lizelle how she felt about her little brother. She was curious about Lizelle's opinion of him and asked her to be honest. Lizelle noted that he was incredibly rich, almost indecently so, but that was a problem she could live with. Casey giggled, fully understanding what was going on. She promised not to tell Lizelle, but warned that L'Appel would have to prepare himself for 5 years of ridicule. L'Appel noticed the boy's red face and asked if he was feeling sick, but Chester quickly reassured him that it wasn't the case. The heat had simply made his skin flush. Afterward, the boy asked where they were going. The gentleman replied that they were heading to the room with the stars. The boy didn't understand why, but the gentleman explained that a new star had appeared, one he wanted to show him. When L'Appel heard about it, he urged the children to hurry. The Duke was surprised to hear that L'Appel liked the stars so much. L'Appel smiled and replied that, of course he liked them, but he also liked his uncle just as much as those twinkling stars. Chester recalled what Leon had once told him about children. They weren't just fragile and precocious, they had an incredible ability to make people smile simply by being themselves. He wondered if one day he would understand his brother's perspective on this. As they walked, the gentleman heard strange sounds and asked the boy what he was doing. L'Appel replied, "I'm sniffing you." The Duke was horrified and asked if he smelled strange. L'Appel said he wasn't sure, but that it was very different from Lizelle's scent and it felt vaguely familiar. Chester was confused and couldn't understand what was going on. The boy suddenly seemed overwhelmed by memories and became frightened, screaming in pain. Chester rushed to him, asking what was wrong. The boy, in a panic, said that his head hurt terribly. Ran approached and asked what had happened, and Chester ordered him to call the doctor immediately. The doctor arrived and quickly examined the boy. She confirmed that his body appeared to be in perfect health, but Chester felt uneasy. He suspected something deeper was at play. Ran, uncertain, suggested that the boy's memories might be coming back. The doctor was surprised to hear that the boy had lost his memory in the first place, and Chester confirmed this, asking if the headaches could be connected. The doctor explained that it was possible, especially if there had been no prior symptoms. She mentioned that there were cases where people experienced excruciating pain in their heads when their memories returned. Chester, concerned, asked what they could do to help. The doctor replied that they could only monitor the boy's condition. She could provide a painkiller to ease the pain if it became unbearable, but otherwise they would have to wait. Chester was disturbed by the thought of watching the boy suffer, and decided that he needed to take action. He gave the boy the painkiller, urging him to drink it so he could feel better. L'Appel, however, was reluctant, saying the medicine smelled awful. Chester insisted, telling him that if he drank it, they could go see the new star. The boy stopped crying immediately and asked if Lizelle could come with them. Of course, the Duke gave his permission and assured him he would feel better soon. L'Appel was brave for enduring the bitter medicine, and the butler, seeing the boy's distress, brought his favourite juice to help wash away the aftertaste. He also called for Lizelle. The boy, feeling tired, said he wanted to sleep, and the gentleman wished him pleasant dreams. Chester, now even more concerned, suggested they leave so the boy could rest properly. Ran congratulated the master for finding the boy and mentioned that the juice the butler had brought contained a potion. Chester was horrified. If the juice contained a potion, it meant that this child was Lizelle's and Leon's son. Lizelle, hearing this, asked if she was really going to leave him after saying goodbye. Casey confirmed it, saying that he wouldn't tell her anything because, after all, they hadn't known each other for long. He added that, in fact, he probably preferred not to see her again at all. Afterwards, they said goodbye. The lady wished her a safe journey, but she behaved strangely afterward. When the Duke approached them, she seemed confused about something. Tia ran to the lady, saying that the young master was ill and that the Duke was calling her immediately. Lizelle, feeling anxious, asked the maid to watch the cat while she rushed to the boy. The cat, in shock, couldn't understand what was happening. Just recently everything had been fine, but now something important seemed to be unfolding, and so he started running after her. Lizelle burst into the room, screaming. The gentleman noticed she had arrived a little late. The boy had just fallen asleep. The Duke had given him some medicine. The lady was completely confused, unsure of what had happened or why he wasn't well. Chester suggested that it was likely his memory was returning, which was causing the headaches. Lizelle felt a wave of relief, as this meant it wasn't an illness after all. She looked at the gentleman and the boy, sensing that something had definitely changed. She couldn't quite figure out why the Duke had such a serious and gloomy expression. Lizelle asked the gentleman if he was all right. Chester apologized, admitting that he had doubted her all this time, and he was deeply sorry for that. Lizelle, though, thought he might be sick too, as she imagined he had some personal problems. She laughed quietly, thinking he was lying because the Duke would never admit something like that. Maybe he had even hit his head on some cobblestone. She wanted to tell the doctor that there was a patient here, but the Duke turned to Lizelle, asking for her forgiveness. The lady didn't know how to respond. Suddenly, the boy woke up. Lizelle was overjoyed and asked if he was feeling better. Elle smiled and said that the pain was almost gone. She noticed how quickly he was recovering, and she was relieved to see him doing so well. Elle then told Lizelle to go to bed too because he wanted to sleep with her. He really wanted her to be near him, so he asked her to lie down. Lizelle suddenly realized that this was the very room the Duke had prepared for his nephew. She knew that Chester wouldn't let Elle stay there, so she suggested that he go back to his own room and sleep there. Elle didn't understand why she said that. Lizelle explained that the room belonged to them. The Duke, however, assured her that everything was fine, but Lizelle was still shocked. She couldn't understand why the room had been set up for the boy in the first place. Chester insisted that the boy could stay in the room. He had suffered enough and needed to rest. The Duke said that Elle could come here at any time. Lizelle, still confused, decided to leave it at that. Elle then asked her to wait while he lay down on the other side of the bed. He truly wanted to sleep with them. The Duke, caught off guard by the request, was struck by the boy's desire. It was impossible to refuse. So, the three of them lay down together. Soon, Elle fell asleep, and Lizelle noticed that for the first time he had talked so much before going to sleep. She guessed it was because his uncle was nearby. She asked if they were distracting him from his work and if everything was all right. Chester noted that he had stayed there of his own will, though it was a bit awkward to be in the same bed with her. Lizelle was truly grateful for the care the gentleman had shown the boy. The Duke reassured her that it was no trouble at all, as he was his uncle. He then decided to talk about something else to calm his nerves. As he glanced over at her, he noticed that she had already fallen asleep, and he was delighted to see her so peaceful, even in the midst of everything happening. Suddenly, his hand reached out toward her. The Duke, startled by his own action, quickly stopped himself. He scolded himself for not thinking through his impulses and forbade himself from acting without her permission. He needed to sleep now without any more strange thoughts. The cat, still observing, found everything very confusing. He realized that he needed to continue watching the situation unfold. The butler knocked on the master's door. Ran noticed that his master seemed so happy to see him and was puzzled about what had happened. He asked Chester to explain everything, but the Duke admitted he didn't know where to start. Ran, unsure of how to phrase his questions, had to begin somewhere. He noticed Lizelle standing by the window. Judging by the Duke's reaction, he felt he was probably right in his assumptions. Ran remarked that the Duke had asked for her forgiveness, and it seemed that she had responded normally. However, Ran wasn't sure if Lizelle was interested in Chester as a man. He had been convinced of this the day they had all slept in the same bed. He had been so nervous he couldn't sleep, but Lizelle had fallen asleep peacefully, as though nothing had changed. Afterwards, it didn't even seem like Lizelle attached any significance to the situation. She looked at L'Elle as if there was no place in her heart for the Duke. The butler had begun to notice this shift in her behaviour, finding it amazing how a person could change so drastically. The gentleman would give in, but Chester didn't want to admit it. He wasn't some weakling who couldn't even get the lady's attention. The Duke told the butler to stop and asked what he wanted to say. Ran informed him that they had a guest. Chester was surprised, as he had already made appointments for the day. Ran explained that the man had decided to visit unannounced. The visitor was Count Cedric Dorrough, who was waiting for the Duke. Cedric remarked that the performance was excellent, though he regretted that the Duke wasn't there to see it. Ran asked if there was anything else the gentleman needed. Chester replied that everything was fine and told Ran to go, as he needed to speak with his old friend. Ran was sure the Duke would argue with Cedric's comment, but the Count noted that his father had sent his regards. Thanks to the Duke, their sales volume with the Imperial Palace had increased, and his father was very pleased with the results. Cedric didn't understand why Chester seemed so distracted. The Duke responded curtly, saying that if that was all, Cedric could leave. The Count, surprised by the Duke's cold demeanour, commented on how busy Chester must be, so much so that he couldn't even talk to his friend. When Cedric looked out the window, he saw a woman, and realised it was Lizelle. Frozen, the Duke tensed up and asked Cedric if he knew her. Cedric didn't know her personally, but he had seen her a couple of times before. She was apparently quite popular, but not in a good way. He then asked what she was doing there. The Duke calmly replied that it was none of Cedric's business, but the Count didn't understand why Chester was treating him so harshly. Cedric then asked about the child with Lizelle, wondering if the woman was manipulating the Duke through the boy. Chester, irritated, asked if Cedric was sane. The Count explained that he was just worried for Chester, as he had heard that the woman's family had gone bankrupt because of her. He thought the best course of action would be for her to sell all her property or, even better, marry for money. He suggested this casually, hoping Chester wouldn't take offence. Cedric pointed out that the Duke had both a title and wealth, and that the woman might be trying to get closer to him for those reasons. Chester, furious, demanded Cedric repeat what he had just said. Cedric nonchalantly said that it was always wise to be cautious around someone like her, a fox, who probably only wanted money. The Duke grabbed him and warned that if he ever heard such a thing again, he would not spare him. He made it clear that this woman was not like that. After releasing Cedric, Chester told him to get out of his sight and never come back. The Count, completely bewildered, didn't understand what had gotten into the Duke. He thought Chester was simply in a bad mood and that his words weren't anything serious. He didn't believe the Duke would be angry with him just for mentioning a girl. Chester, seething, asked if Cedric had heard him clearly. He told him to get lost before he broke his neck. Cedric, still not understanding, reminded the Duke that they were both nobles, and that he had no right to speak to him like that. He said he would remember this. The butler entered the room and, sensing something was off, asked his master what had happened. Chester, still angry, announced that they were terminating all contracts with the Dorrough family. Ran was surprised and noted that they wouldn't suffer any losses from this decision, but asked why Chester had done it so suddenly. Chester replied that even if they did suffer losses, he would tear them apart. He then ordered Ran to find out how much Lizelle's family owed, and to whom. Even if she didn't choose him, Chester couldn't allow her to marry simply because of financial need. Meanwhile, Lizelle asked L'Elle not to move, as the water would spill onto the floor. L'Elle smiled and said he would make some bottles for her too, and asked her to look at him. Lizelle was glad to see that he was no longer afraid of the water. Meanwhile, the bubbles burst right on her nose. The girl, grateful for the moment, decided that, in return, she would make him taller. Lizelle added more foam, and the boy looked in the mirror to see that his head had grown huge. L'Elle was overjoyed by the change, happy to be so tall, and suggested that she should do it again. However, the girl declined, saying it wasn't necessary and that she would refuse, as she would have to wash up again afterwards. Lizelle then asked the boy if they should dry his hair. Elle replied that they wouldn't, but if she caught him, then yes. He seemed to think it would dry out on its own if he kept running around. Tia wished the lady good night, and Lizelle responded kindly. Then the maid suddenly remembered and mentioned that tomorrow was the big day. Lizelle didn't quite understand what she was referring to, so Tia clarified that it was nothing, just that it was already night, and Lizelle didn't fully grasp what it meant, but the boy asked if he could drink some milk. The girl apologized and told him to hurry and drink it before it got cold. As he finished, Lizelle realized that the potion would arrive tomorrow, and soon their paths would begin to diverge. She noticed that the boy sighed happily after drinking his milk, so she asked who had taught him to do that. Elle replied that moles did. Lizelle was surprised to hear that he drank milk too. The boy didn't understand what she meant, but he liked the yellow drink, so now he did it too. Lizelle advised him not to do that in front of others. But Elle didn't understand why. She explained that he would grow up around nobles who would always be looking for faults, even under his fingernails. She added that people would envy his cool new habits, so he should be careful not to show them off too much. It was now time for bed, but the boy didn't want to sleep. He turned to Lizelle and asked if they could sleep with Uncle like last time. Lizelle felt uneasy about it. She didn't think she could voluntarily sign up for that again, and she even remembered snorting the last time, which embarrassed her. She told him they could do it next time, and Elle eagerly asked when that next time would be. The girl, unsure, replied, "Probably soon." "The day after tomorrow," Elle agreed. But Lizelle knew she had to keep her word because she had promised. She truly wanted to apologize because, after she left, she knew this false promise would hurt him. Despite initially finding him because of the reward, in this short time, he had become the most important thing in her life. Therefore, she hugged the boy and quietly cried, genuinely feeling sorry. Ran, deciding to be helpful, asked the master if he wanted to delay the delivery of the potion for a few days, but the master replied that it was unnecessary. He had already promised the lady. Chester knocked on her door and announced he would be entering. Lizelle was surprised and asked if the juice was the potion and if it had any side effects. The Duke assured her it did not, and she could trust him. Lizelle asked the boy to wake up since his uncle had arrived. Ran, noticing that the boy was probably thirsty, brought him some juice. Elle was thrilled and said he was very thirsty, but suddenly the Duke stopped everything. Lizelle asked what was wrong, thinking he might have remembered something important. Chester said it was automatic, just what was on his mind, and there was no way to drag this out any longer. Lizelle approached him and asked in a whisper if he was absolutely sure that there were no side effects. She wondered if he had lied to her, but he reassured her everything was fine. However, Lizelle did not understand why he suddenly told the boy not to drink the juice. She was shocked, thinking he was lying, and even more surprised that he still didn't trust her. Chester assured her that it wasn't about trust. He just wanted her to stay, even if only for a little while longer. He expressed that he truly wanted her to stay. Suddenly, the boy interrupted them, saying he had already drunk the juice. He remembered his promise not to interrupt the adults and apologized. Lizelle approached him and asked if everything was okay, if he was in pain. Chester repeated that he would be fine. Lizelle understood and asked what would happen next. She expected there might be some effect from the potion, perhaps a magical glow. Chester noted that they now knew for certain that Elle was his nephew. He had known for a long time, but still felt his heart squeeze at the thought of finally finding him. His brother could now rest in peace. Lizelle was happy that Chester had confirmed everything, and he thanked her for helping him. The lady thought she should hug the boy, but she felt so heartbroken. Lizelle told Elle to hug his uncle, and the boy eagerly jumped into Chester's arms. Ran, too, thanked the lady sincerely. Lizelle felt there was no need for thanks. She was just happy they had found each other. Ran was surprised by her emotional reaction. Lizelle didn't understand where her tears were coming from. Chester too was in shock, and Elle asked why she was crying. Lizelle didn't want to cry because she was planning to leave them. She had wanted to make their last moments happy and carefree, but now it seemed impossible. Elle asked what was wrong, and Lizelle told him it was nothing, just a speck of dust in her eye. The Duke handed her a handkerchief, and Lizelle, grateful, tried her best to stop crying, but the tears wouldn't stop. She turned to the boy and asked him to listen to his uncle from now on. He should eat his carrots and not be afraid to swim. If he was scared to sleep alone, he should ask his uncle to sleep with him. Elle needed to grow up to be a strong, healthy boy. After saying this, Lizelle hugged him tightly. Elle said if she left, he would go with her, but she told him this was his home now, and it was better for him to stay here. The boy cried loudly, saying that she had promised to always be with him. Lizelle began to apologize, but she had to go. Elle insisted, saying he would go with her, and they could live in the same house. Chester watched them both cry, unsure of what to do. Lizelle asked if the Duke could take him away, and Chester ordered the butler to take the boy. Elle screamed, clinging to her so tightly that he tore her shirt. He begged her not to leave and to take him with her. Lizelle asked when she could receive her reward. The Duke said he would write her a check now. Lizelle apologized, saying she wanted to get home quickly. She asked him to send her luggage home, as she had already decided to leave. She thanked him for his hospitality. The Duke, however, asked her to stop. Chester began to apologize for how he had treated her. Lizelle reassured him that it wasn't necessary, as it was expected. She was just happy the misunderstandings were now behind them. Elle continued to cry loudly, but Lizelle apologized again, saying it was time for her to go. Chester realized things couldn't end like this, so he asked the butler to look into. After the child had run after the lady, he grabbed her hand, asking her to stop and wait. Chester, visibly distressed, asked if she could spare him a moment of her time. He knew that if he insisted she stay, things would end badly, but if he kept her, he would do so at any cost. He suggested they first tend to her wounds before talking. Lizelle, still shaken, had yet to calm down. The Duke asked her to wait while he brought the first aid kit. Overcome with emotion, she cried even more, feeling a deep sense of shame. She didn't understand why she was crying so much and hoped he wouldn't make fun of her. But deep down, she knew there would be no later to laugh about it, as today was their last day together. She would never meet these people again. And this was the room where she had asked the Duke for a favor, a situation that would never happen again. Despite wanting to cry again, she forced herself to calm down. The Duke apologized for being a little late and handed her some water. Lizelle realized she should be happy. After all, once she received her reward, she could pay off the family's debts. It was a great day, so she tried to smile, though it was difficult. The Duke noticed that she was still feeling unwell and thought it might be best to leave her alone for a while. But Lizelle reassured him, saying everything was fine. He asked her to show him where she was hurt. Lizelle told him she could treat the wound herself, but her sleeve was in the way, so she decided to rip it off. The Duke, aware that he probably shouldn't be watching, tried to calm himself. Now was not the time to get lost in thoughts. Lizelle had finished treating herself, and then, with a deep breath, asked what he wanted to talk to her about. Chester was troubled, knowing he had been holding her up for no reason all this time. He couldn't come up with a good excuse quickly. If Edric had been there, he could have thought of something ridiculous, but as Chester sat with the situation, he knew that letting her go without saying anything would make his fears come true. He would have to detain her even though he didn't want to lie. But at this moment, he had no other choice. Lizelle, confused by his hesitation, asked again what was going on. Chester, gathering his courage, finally proposed marriage. Lizelle, stunned, couldn't understand why he was suddenly talking about this. She wondered if he was ill or drunk. Chester calmly reassured her that he was of sound mind and memory. Lizelle was baffled that someone who clearly had some emotional struggles would bring up such a thing. Whatever the reason, she knew she had to refuse. Chester was shocked, asking if she truly disliked the idea of marrying him so much. Lizelle confirmed that she couldn't marry him because they weren't in love. He asked her to marry him for the sake of the boy, as Elle needed her and wouldn't manage without her. Chester expressed concern for the boy's well-being, but Lizelle didn't understand why he thought she was the only one who could help. Chester almost confessed his feelings right then and there, but when Lizelle apologized for being a little cold and asked him to repeat himself, he hesitated. Lizelle asked if this proposal meant they would have a marriage contract for the sake of the boy. She understood his reasons, but still felt forced to refuse. She had her own life and desires. She didn't want to marry without love, so she told him that if that was all he had to offer, she would be leaving. Chester tried to stop her, urging her to think carefully, but she responded that, no matter how he looked at it, it still meant marriage. The Duke, desperate, asked her to stop, and then shouted, proposing a 1-year contract marriage with an increased reward, 100 times what she had been promised. But before he could finish, Lizelle turned to him